I'm Stefani Gambetta. I really thought Zurich was far enough from home, far enough from New York, far enough from the life my father controls. Then one phone call proved something I never wanted to believe. Distance doesn't protect a daughter from a man who thinks he owns her future. He'd already made the decision. A deal. A marriage. A man with a name I wasn't even given. And it was being done for me. Without me. So I ran to Barcelona. Not because it was brave, but because it was the only move left. All I ever wanted was simple. To stand on my own feet. To choose my own path. To live a life that belonged to me. But the truth is, my family's dark world doesn't let go. Not ever. Because while I was in Barcelona telling myself I was finally free, while I was letting myself fall for the most dangerously irresistible man I'd ever seen, someone thousands of miles away was already looking at my photos, already making a decision about my life. I didn't know fate would keep testing me with the same cruel lesson. The choice had already been made, and without realizing it, I was only walking closer to it. I'm Stefani Gambetta, standing in a wedding dress, seconds away from making a decision. Everything is about to change, and you're going to watch it happen.
Stefani Gambetta paused outside the entrance of an elegant building on a street she'd never been on before, suitcase in hand, darkness just settling over Barcelona. Just one phone call. That's all it had taken for her entire life and every plan she'd made to fall apart. She had no idea what came next. She rang the buzzer. Maria Reyes, her closest friend from university in Zurich, a Madrid girl with a Barcelona apartment and the rare quality of never asking more than you were ready to give, opened the door with worry she hadn't bothered to hide. "Stephanie. Oh my God." She pulled her in. "Your voice on the phone, I've been so worried." Walking through the door, feeling her friend's arms around her, something in her finally gave. Her eyes burned. She'd been holding it back for 2 days straight, moving, calculating, not letting herself stop long enough to feel any of it. Maria brought her water, sat across from her, and waited. Then, she reached over and rubbed Stephanie's shoulder once. "Tell me everything, honey." Outside, Plaza del Sol sat in its quiet evening rhythm, people on benches, a cyclist cutting through without looking up. The whole easy weight of an ordinary Tuesday, nobody watching over their shoulder. Stephanie set her glass down. "Being born into my family is a curse, Maria. I went to Switzerland to get away from all of it. Tried to build something in Zurich. And then my father called. Said I needed to be on the first flight back to New York. That if I didn't, he'd cut off all financial support." Maria leaned in, her voice careful. "You've barely mentioned your family. Why don't you want to go back?" She looked at the square below, choosing where to start. "The Gambetta name means something in New York, Maria. My father is powerful, and he is very controlling. My mother tried to keep me away from all of it before she died, but now she's gone." She looked up. "And then he told me I need to marry the head of a family he does business with, that both families have already agreed." Maria's hand went to her mouth. "I can't believe this still happens." Stephanie's smile had nothing warm in it. "In a family like mine, everything is a business arrangement, including marriage." Maria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who is he? This man you're supposed to marry?" "I have no idea. She'd been in Zurich since she was 14. She didn't know the names her father dealt with, the rooms she was never supposed to ask about. She'd never wanted to know. His world was never mine." Maria reached over and held her hands. "You can stay here as long as you need. We'll figure something out." When I told him no, he lost it. Stephanie wiped the corner of her eye. "He's already sent people to Zurich. I flew to Paris first to throw them off, then took the train down. But my father—" Her voice went quiet. "He never lets anything go. Not once in his life." Maria squeezed her hands. "Even if they find out you're in Barcelona, they won't find this apartment. Stefani tried to believe her. "I don't know how long I can stay ahead of him, but I'm going to try everything I've got." Her mother had left her money, a separate account, in her own name only. "Keep something they don't know about," she used to say, like it was general advice. Stephanie understood now that it wasn't. Across the street, in the dark at the corner where the lamplight stopped, a man pushed off the wall and dropped his cigarette. He'd been standing there the better part of 20 minutes, long enough to confirm the second-floor light, the two silhouettes in the window, the outline of a suitcase through the glass. He dialed. The line picked up on the second ring. The voice on the other end was flat, quiet, the kind that didn't need to raise itself to make a point. "Where are you?" "Barcelona, boss." He looked up at the window one last time. "Sending the address now." Thousands of miles away, the Castiello mansion sat under a different kind of quiet, not the peaceful kind. Tony Gambetta was a man who made other men nervous for a living. He'd built that reputation over 40 years, one careful move at a time. But Leonardo Castiello stood at the window, his back to the room, and Tony, standing behind him, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertain. "Mr. Castiello," he kept his voice measured, "my word is my word. I'll find her and bring her back. She's young. She heard the news without any preparation and reacted out of shock. I'm sending my men now. The wedding will happen within the month, exactly as we agreed." Leonardo turned slowly. His face gave nothing. Hands in his pockets, weight distributed evenly, the particular stillness of a man who had learned long ago that composure was its own kind of weapon. He looked at Tony the way you look at a problem you've already solved. Measuring, not hostile. Just done with the conversation before it had properly started. "Mr. Gambetta." His voice was low, unhurried. "This arrangement was your idea. Marriage was the last thing on my mind, certainly not to a woman I've never spoken a word to. But I considered it because it addressed a real problem between our families, strategically, rationally." He took a few steps forward, closing the distance without any urgency. "I don't force women into anything." Tony held his ground. Leonardo Castiello was his father's son. That much had been clear from the moment he walked in. The same economy of movement, the same way of letting silence do the work. If this fell apart now, every piece of the arrangement went with it. "You clearly can't control your own daughter." Leonardo's tone carried no heat. That was somehow worse. "I have no interest in spending my time managing a rebellious woman. 1 week. Tony's jaw tightened. "Give me 1 week. My daughter is not rebellious. She's educated. She's disciplined. Computer engineering, top of her class." This was a reaction, not a pattern. His eyes were hard. 1 week, and everything will be in order." Leonardo Castiello looked at him. His expression didn't change, but something in the set of his jaw did. Not anger, calculation. "I'll handle this myself." He moved toward the door, and with one slight gesture of his hand, his man stepped forward and opened it. Dark mahogany, heavy on its hinges. "If my people can't locate her within the week, or if I find her and decide she's not what this agreement requires, the wedding's off, and so is everything else." Tony Gambetta looked at the open door, understood exactly what it meant. He gave a single nod and walked out without another word. The mahogany door closed behind him. Leonardo moved to his desk and picked up his phone. He scrolled to a message from 2 days ago and opened the photo attached to it. A young woman, leaving what looked like a grocery store. Wavy brunette hair, a sweatshirt, track pants, completely unbothered. Caught mid-step, not looking at the camera. The kind of person who moved through the world like she had no idea anyone was watching. "Stefani Gambetta," he murmured. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're not making this easy, are you?" He set the phone face down on the desk and reached for his jacket. 7 days inside the same 4 walls will do something to you. Stephanie had told herself it was discipline, smart, necessary, the right call. She'd gone out exactly once, to the corner market 10 minutes away, hood up, sunglasses on, back before anyone could look at her twice. The rest of the time she'd sat at Maria's kitchen table filling out job applications, refreshing her inbox, and listening to the building's pipes make sounds she'd started to recognize by hour. Her Swiss SIM was still under the mattress in her old Zurich apartment. The number she was using now was clean, bought in cash, no name attached. Her father's people would eventually find the trail, she knew that. But eventually wasn't yet, and yet was all she had. That evening, Maria set a glass of wine in front of her and crossed her arms. "You reorganized my kitchen cabinet this morning, by category." Stephanie looked up from her laptop. It made more sense that way. "You're losing your mind in here." Maria pushed the glass closer. "Come out with me. A few hours. Somewhere loud enough that your own thoughts can't follow you." Stephanie looked at the window. Dark outside, warm by the look of it. She'd been staring at that window for 7 days. She picked up the wine. Fine. The club sat right on the water, one wall open to the sea, and the air inside carried both, music and salt, layered together in a way that made it easy to just stand and breathe for a moment. Stephanie did exactly that, one hand on the bar, feeling the week's worth of tension begin to shift in her shoulders. She'd put on her denim jumpsuit, the only thing close to going out clothes she'd grabbed when she packed in the dark days ago. Around her, women moved in backless dresses with the confidence of people who'd planned to be looked at. Stephanie caught her own reflection in the bar mirror and thought, "Fine, this is fine," and ordered tequila because it was the only drink that had ever actually felt like a choice. Maria appeared at her shoulder, watched her knock back the shot, and laughed in that full, unself-conscious way she had. Her arm went around Stephanie's neck, and she pulled her close. "Nobody believes me when I tell them. You look like a girl who orders chamomile tea." "That's my greatest strength," Stephanie said, and for a moment it felt like Zurich, late nights in their campus apartment, the specific relief of surviving something together. Maria's presence said what it always had. "You're right here. You're okay." A man appeared at Maria's side then, already smiling, asking her to dance in fast, warm Spanish. Maria's eyes found Stephanie first, the question written plainly in them. Stephanie shook her head and tilted it toward the dance floor. Maria went, already laughing before she'd taken 3 steps, and Stephanie turned back to the bar. She was watching the crowd in the mirror when the man appeared beside her. Spanish, young, good-looking in a way that seemed conscious of itself. He leaned in close and said something that had the shape of a compliment, even without the translation. "I don't speak Spanish," Stephanie told him, keeping her eyes on the mirror. "Sorry." He switched to accented English without missing a beat, told her she had beautiful hair, beautiful eyes, that he'd been watching her from across the room. His hand found the bar beside hers, casual, deniable, close enough that his fingers grazed hers. She moved her hand away. "I'm good, thanks." He said something else and reached for her hand again, this time with actual intent, and she was pulling back and deciding exactly how to handle it when a voice came from her left, low, level, not raised at all. "She told you no. Hands off." She turned. The man standing beside her was tall, white shirt open at the collar, sleeves pushed to his elbows, and he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the Spanish guy with the patient, unblinking attention of someone with nowhere else to be and nothing to prove. The Spanish guy read it the same way she did. Small smile, hands raised, not worth it, and backed into the crowd. Stephanie looked at the man beside her. He'd already turned back to the bar, 2 fingers raised at the bartender. "Negroni. Straight." She glanced at him sideways. "Thank you," she said. His head moved slightly in acknowledgement, not a nod exactly, just a shift. And that was it. No follow-up, no waiting around for gratitude. He'd said what needed saying, and the moment was already behind him. She faced the mirror again, and that's when she caught it. Something clean and specific, cutting through the bar's warm mix of alcohol and bodies. Lemon. Bergamot. Salt underneath, the real kind, like it came from somewhere open air and actual. Without deciding to, she turned her head. From the side, his jaw was sharp and still, elbow easy on the bar, glass loose in his hand. Everything about his posture said he'd been in enough rooms like this that none of it required effort anymore. The question left her mouth before she'd cleared it. "American?" He glanced over. Brief, the way you check something. Then back to the room. "Yeah, you too." She faced the mirror again. "That obvious?" The corner of his mouth shifted. Little bit. He said it without looking at her, and somehow that made it worse. Or better, she couldn't tell which. She turned back to her glass. In the mirror she could watch him without making it a thing. The set of his shoulders, the way he let the silence after his answer sit without trying to fill it. Her pulse was doing something she had no interest in examining. His eyes moved to her when he spoke again, though his body didn't turn. Work or vacation? Running, she thought. The word is running. She kept her gaze on the mirror. Somewhere between both. He made a sound that acknowledged it without pressing, and his eyes went back to the room. Then his gaze dropped to the empty shot glass in front of her, and the fresh one the bartender had just set beside it. He picked up his Negroni, his weight already shifting back from the bar. Easy with those. I won't be around next time. He walked, and the crowd rearranged itself around him without contact, people shifting the way they do for someone who doesn't slow down. He reached the VIP section near the far wall, elevated and half in shadow, where two women were already seated. One of them put her hand on his arm the moment he sat. He said something without leaning in. Stephanie looked at her shot glass and thought, right, he'd stepped in because someone was bothering her. 2 sentences, then gone. He hadn't asked her name, hadn't angled for anything. And yet every time she looked somewhere else, her eyes eventually drifted back to that VIP section, the way a tongue finds a sore tooth. Maria came back flushed from the dance floor, dropped onto the bar stool and looked at her. Not the polite kind of looking. What happened? Nothing. Stephanie reached for her tequila. Someone was bothering me. A guy stepped in, said 2 words and left. Maria waited. Stephanie set her glass down and kept her voice low. Far wall, VIP section, white shirt. Don't make it obvious. She leaned in slightly. Do you know him? Maria looked anyway. She always did. Took her time. Her expression shifted into something that was equal parts impressed and appreciative. Okay. Wow. She turned back slowly, like it cost her something. I wish I knew who that was. Look at him. She tilted her head. Intense. In a good way. You lucky thing. That guy stepped in for you? Stephanie shrugged. It was nothing. 2 sentences. He's in the VIP section. They keep those for people with money or connections, usually both. Maria turned back, something curious settling in her expression. Okay. Why do you care? Stephanie shrugged, the non-answer that was also an answer, and Maria knew her well enough to let it land. She kept her decision for the rest of the night, mostly. Near midnight she felt it, the prickle of being watched, and looked up before she told herself to. Across the room, from that half-shadowed VIP section, green eyes were already on her. He didn't look away first. Back at the apartment, she lay in the dark, running through the job applications the way she did every night before sleep. Who'd responded? Who hadn't? What was realistic? What wasn't? She had 6 months of her mother's money if she was careful. A runway, not a cushion, and the clock was running whether she thought about it or not. She closed her eyes. I won't be around next time. Not a line, not a warning, just a man who said what he meant and didn't dress it up. She didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him except the lemon and salt smell, and eyes the dark green of water with depth to it, and the way he had looked at her across a room, once, briefly, like he'd already made up his mind about something. She turned over and told herself to sleep. It took longer than it should have. The call came mid-morning. A tech company, well known enough that she recognized the name immediately, asking her to come in for an interview the following week. Stephanie set the phone down on the kitchen table and sat with it for a moment. 10 days in Barcelona. No word from her father, which meant the clock was still running, but hadn't run out yet. She had an interview. She had time. She had her mother's money, and for the first time since Zurich, something that felt like a direction. Maria appeared in the doorway in a bikini, a tote bag over one shoulder. Beach. Now. Get dressed. Stephanie looked up. I have things to... You had an interview call. That's wonderful. You also haven't seen the sun in 10 days. Maria tilted her head. Move. The beach was white sand and palm trees and water so blue it looked like someone had been deliberate about it. Stephanie stood at the edge where the wet sand met the dry and felt something in her chest quietly uncurl. Maria. She turned to look at her. Why did you never invite me here in 4 years? Maria spread her towel and dropped onto it with the ease of someone entirely at home. You're joking, right? Every weekend we asked you somewhere, every single one. She squinted up at her. You always had a problem set due. Stephanie lay down on her own towel and looked at the sky. Fair enough. An hour later, Maria spotted friends further down the beach and went to say hello, waving Stephanie along. Stephanie shook her head and watched her go, then stood, walked to the water's edge, and kept walking until the sea was deep enough to swim. She was good in the water, had been since high school, 4 years on the swim team, her body remembering the rhythm of it before her mind caught up. She moved out easily, past the breakers, into the open stretch where the sound of the beach fell away and there was only the pull of her own arms and the water closing over and opening around her. She'd gone maybe 160 feet from shore when it hit her, a burn, sharp and immediate, spreading across her stomach before she'd processed what touched her. Then the dizziness, not gradual, not building, just suddenly there, her limbs going heavy and uncooperative, the water suddenly feeling less like something she knew how to read. She turned towards shore. It was far, too far for how little her body was listening to her. The sound of the engine reached her before she saw it. A wooden speedboat, polished and elegant, already turning in her direction, like whoever was driving had noticed before she'd had time to signal anything. It came alongside her fast, and an arm reached down and pulled. She didn't fight it. The sun hit her eyes first. She was on her back, the boat's deck solid beneath her, and the face above her was backlit and blurred. She registered the green of his eyes in the second before everything went dark. When she opened them again, the world came back in pieces. White deck, sky too bright, the low hum of an engine somewhere beneath her. She was on her back, something solid and warm under her, and her stomach still burned but differently now. Duller, like a warning that had already done its job. She turned her head. Barefoot, wet, swim shorts and nothing else, and standing over her like he had nowhere more pressing to be, was the man from the club. He was already opening a small jar when she looked at him. He sat down beside her without asking, dipped 2 fingers into whatever was in it. Her throat was dry, her voice unsteady. Where am I? My boat. He didn't look up. Pink jellyfish. You've got partial paralysis and your stomach is probably burning pretty badly right now. She tried to lift her head to look. Her abdomen was red and livid, the skin angry in a way that made her stomach turn. Don't. His hand pressed gently at her shoulder, easing her back down. This is a good ointment. I need to put it on. She didn't have the energy to argue. His fingers moved across the burn carefully. Not hesitant, not clinical, just unhurried and deliberate, the way someone touches something they're being careful with. She stared at the sky and concentrated on breathing through the sting. Pink jellyfish are rare, he said, working the ointment in slow circles. But when you do run into one, it can kill you if you're unlucky. He glanced at her stomach, then back to what he was doing. Must have been a young one. Could have been a lot worse. She turned her head and looked at him from the side. The line of his jaw, the cut of his shoulders, the bracelet on his wrist she hadn't noticed at the club. The same scent as that night, lemon and bergamot and salt, stronger out here with the sun on his skin. Not a dream, not a coincidence she'd imagined. His eyes moved to hers then, something shifting at the back of them. Apparently the universe keeps sending me to bail you out. The heat in her stomach had dropped to a dull throb. Her head was clearer now, clear enough to register exactly where she was, whose boat this was, and how she must look lying flat on her back, being tended to by a stranger she'd spent the better part of a night trying not to think about. She felt the color rise in her face before she could do anything about it. She pushed herself upright slowly, one hand braced against the deck, and made herself look around, the shore at a distance, the white hull, the open water, because it was easier than looking at him. Lucky for you, I was heading back to the marina when I spotted you. He settled back, unhurried, watching her find her bearings. Do you always find trouble, or does it find you? She looked at him then. He was watching her with that same even expression he'd had at the bar. Not unkind, not particularly warm either, just steady, patient, like he had all the time in the world and was simply waiting to see what she'd do with hers. The embarrassment was still there, sitting hot in her chest, but something underneath it had shifted. She held out her hand. I'm Stephanie. He looked at her hand, then at her face. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she'd seen from him yet. His hand closed around hers. Reuben. She pushed herself upright. The burn had dropped to a dull throb, manageable now, and her head was clear enough to register the full situation. Stranger's boat, bikini, salt-dried hair, no real exit. He'd settled back into the seat near the helm, one ankle crossed over his knee, watching the water like this was perfectly ordinary. Do you live here? She asked. In Barcelona. He turned his head and looked at her for a moment, unhurried, like the question deserved actual consideration. Sometimes. She waited. Nothing else came. Right, not a talker. Then he leaned forward, forearms on his knees, and she had the sense he'd decided to give her something. I'm from New York. Business connections here, some property. He said it the way you'd describe a commute. Factual, unimpressed with itself. Her eyebrows lifted before she could stop them. New York. She almost laughed. No way, I'm from New York too. She turned toward the water, something loosening slightly in her chest. Though I left when I was 14, Switzerland mostly. I'm thinking about staying here now, setting something up. He watched her for a moment. Why Barcelona? The question was easy, no pressure behind it, just genuine. She lifted one shoulder. Good weather, the sea. Then she heard herself adding, why not? And felt it a second later, the small internal alarm. Too easy, too open. She'd let the conversation run without deciding to, and now his eyes were staying on her face a beat longer than the answer required. She sat a little straighter. Are you working here? He asked. Looking for work, tech specifically. She kept her voice even, the way she always did when bracing for someone to be surprised. I studied computer engineering. He was quiet for a second. Then, impressive. He looked at her. Not the reflexive kind, something more deliberate, like he was reassembling her from the information. Smart and... He stopped, left the rest of it in the air between them. The warmth that moved into her face was immediate, and she had no defense against it whatsoever. She'd been complimented before, plenty of times, mostly by men who led with flattery because they thought it was the most efficient tool. This didn't feel like that. It felt like an observation, like he'd said something true and had no interest in dressing it up, which was, somehow, significantly worse. Thank you, she said, and looked at the horizon. He let the quiet run. Then he tilted his head slightly. Is your family here? The question did what it always did, a closing off, automatic, the way a door swings shut before you've decided to close it. She'd been finding the clean version of this answer her whole life. Elementary school in New York. Her father was in the hospital because of a car accident. Not the truth? Never the truth. The truth was men in suits in the hallway at midnight, her mother's face going carefully blank when certain names came up at dinner. She'd understood it before she had the language for it. You didn't hand people the real answer. You gave them something that looked like one and got out clean. No. She heard the flatness in her own voice and left it. I lost my mother 2 years ago. My father's in New York. We're not close. Reuben nodded once. He looked at her, not with the careful, assembled expression of someone finding the right thing to say, but directly, like he meant it. Fathers can be difficult. She smiled, small, genuine, not planned. He hadn't reached for the careful phrase or the sympathetic tilt of the head. He'd just said something true. She liked him for it more than she wanted to. She was already curious about things she hadn't meant to be curious about. The bracelet, the way he'd handled the jar, the fact that he went quiet when he had nothing to add. every small thing. She caught herself mid-thought and stood up. I should get back. My friend is probably losing it on that beach right now. He rose at the same moment, picked up the jar from the deck. One more application first. I can do it myself. She reached across for the jar. His hand closed around her wrist. Not a grip, just a stop, calm and completely certain. I'll do it. Her pulse did something she had no intention of examining. She lay back. He sat beside her and opened the jar. His fingers moved slowly across the reddened skin, methodical at first, working the ointment in where the irritation was worst, then lower, tracing the faded edge of the burn near the waistband of her bikini bottom. Not rushed, not asking. She bit the inside of her lip and kept her eyes on the sky and breathed through it. I'd rather, he said, his fingers still moving against her skin, that the next time I find you, you're not in some kind of danger. He looked up at her then. So, dinner tonight, if you're free. She stared at the sky. His fingertips were still tracing the edge of the burn, low, unhurried, and his voice had settled somewhere in her chest she couldn't locate. And she thought, who on earth could say no to you? She thought it clearly, without ambiguity, and immediately decided he was not going to know that. I'm not sure. She kept her voice even. I'm staying with a friend. She might have something planned. He stopped, not gradually, just stopped, fingers going still against her skin. He looked at her. 8 o'clock. I'll pick you up. He held her gaze, waiting. Address? She opened her mouth, intending to say she'd let him know. Plaza del Sol, number 17. She heard herself say it like someone else had made the call. He smiled. Brief, quiet, gone almost before she'd registered it. But it changed the whole shape of his face, and she was going to be thinking about that later, whether she wanted to or not. He stood and held out his hand. Come on. The boat moved toward shore with the sun sitting low, the light warm and flat across the water. Stephanie sat on the bench with the wind pulling at her hair and watched him at the helm. 3 dates in her entire life. Maybe. She'd avoided the whole thing deliberately, between the coursework and the older, quieter habit of keeping people far enough away that they couldn't find out anything real. It was practical. She'd made that choice young and never seriously questioned it. Reuben glanced back at her from the helm. She looked at the water, but she could still feel it. The quality of his attention, even when it wasn't aimed at her. Some people made you feel watched. He made her feel something she didn't have a clean word for. Considered, maybe, like she was something worth slowing down for, like he'd decided something and saw no reason to rush the announcement. That's exactly why it's dangerous, said a quieter part of her. The engine dropped to a low hum as the bow nosed into the shallows. He swung over the side without ceremony, the sea rising to his waist, and held out his hand. She took it. He lifted her, one arm at her back, hand at her hip, clean and sudden, and the small sound that escaped her was entirely involuntary. His skin was warm from the sun. She felt it everywhere they were in contact. His arm at her back, his palm at her hip, all of it solid and present. She looked straight ahead and said nothing, and concentrated very hard on acting like a person who had her life together. He set her down in ankle-deep water. His thumb moved once, briefly, against the back of her hand. Just that, just once, before he let go. I'm glad I met you, Stephanie. Low, unhurried. Tonight, I want to know you better. She made herself take her time with the smile. We'll see. She walked up through the shallows without looking back. The whole ordinary world just moving, like nothing had shifted. Her heartbeat still wasn't entirely normal, and she was absolutely not going to turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel exactly where his eyes were. Maria was already on her feet when Stephanie cleared the water. I've been looking everywhere. You weren't in the water. I couldn't see you, and I... She stopped. Her eyes moved across Stephanie's face, dropped to the fading redness on her stomach, came back up. She knew that expression. She'd worn it herself more than once. What happened? Stephanie pointed back at the shallows. The boat was still there, a figure standing in the water watching the shore. Jellyfish. Someone pulled me out. Maria looked at the boat, at the figure. The alarm in her expression quietly reorganized itself into something else entirely. Who is that? I have a date tonight. Stephanie kept walking toward the towels, lifting one shoulder like it was nothing. She said it the way you say something you're still in the process of deciding how seriously to take. Maria grabbed her hand and pulled her down onto the towel. Sit. She was already leaning in, her voice dropping, eyes fully awake. From the beginning, don't you dare leave anything out. 8 minutes to 8. Stephanie stood at the mirror in the pale blue dress Maria had spent 45 minutes convincing her to buy and made herself look. She'd wanted to go in shorts and a t-shirt. Maria had looked at her like she'd suggested showing up in a trash bag. The dress was simple, not trying to be anything, and it fell well, and the color worked against her skin. She turned once. Fine, good enough. Stephanie. Maria's voice came from the window, low and deliberate, the way she said things when she was trying to sound calm and failing. I think he's here. She turned around. Maria let out a low breath. Wow. She still hadn't moved from the window. Black Maserati. Her eyes stayed on the street. And, okay. He looks very good. Stefani crossed the room in 3 steps and looked over her shoulder. Down on the street, Ruben had gotten out of the car and was looking up at the building. Jacket, dark trousers, that particular stillness of his that occupied space without demanding it. Her heart did something abrupt and inconvenient. Maria. She stepped back from the window. I don't know what to say to him. He's in his 30s. He's clearly, I don't know, some kind of serious businessman. What am I even? You, Maria turned to face her, are the smartest, most genuine person I know. You're also, for what it's worth, objectively beautiful, which I say as someone who has seen you eat cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. Her eyes stayed on her. He invited you to dinner, Stephanie. He already knows something. Stephanie looked at her for a moment. Then she straightened up, pulled in a breath, and reached for her bag. Okay, I'm going. Have fun. Maria was already grinning. And honey, don't forget, you have one life to live. Don't think too much, just go. Ruben was standing by the open passenger door when she came out, one hand resting on the frame, watching the street. He heard her before she reached him and turned, and for a moment, just a moment, his attention shifted in a way that was different from the boat, different from the bar. More direct, more deliberate. She smiled at him and moved to get in. She was close enough now to catch his scent. Lemon, bergamot, something clean underneath. And her body registered it before she did. His hand found her waist, light through the fabric, certain enough to stop her mid-step. She looked up at him. Neither of them moved. You look beautiful, Stephanie. Quiet, like a fact he'd already decided on. Thank you. She looked at him a moment longer, then got in the car. The Maserati moved through the city like it belonged there. Barcelona at night had a different texture than the daytime. The streets yellow-lit and warm, the city settling into itself. They talked easily, which she hadn't expected. She told him about the city as she'd seen it so far, mostly from Maria's apartment, one long walk through Elborn that had taken an unexpected turn into a courtyard she'd sat in for an hour, reading a plaque about medieval trade routes because it was there and she had nothing else to do. He listened, then told her about places she hadn't found yet. A viewpoint above the city most people walked right past, a restaurant in Gracia that had been in the same family since 1946. The restaurant he'd chosen was built over the water, open on one side to the sea. No sign outside, no effort made at impression. Ruben in linen, completely at ease, entirely in his element. The food arrived, and she was mid-sentence about her graduation project when he set down his fork and gave her his full attention. She kept going. The project had been on security architecture, specifically human error vulnerabilities, the places in a system where people's predictable mistakes created the gaps. Interesting angle. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Are you a perfectionist? No. She shook her head. I just don't like vulnerabilities. I think I have I don't know, a need for things to be secure, stable. She glanced at her plate, which is ironic given my current situation. The corner of his mouth moved. Both times I've found you, you've been in some kind of danger. He reached for his wine, for someone who's apparently very careful. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. Exactly. Think about that. He smiled. Then he looked at her over the rim of his glass, something shifting behind his eyes, quieter, more considered. 10 years away from New York, away from your family. He set the glass down. This need to feel safe, to close the gaps. Does that come from home? Were you not safe there? Family questions always hit the same place in her chest. This one was no different. She swallowed it. I don't like talking about my family. He nodded once. Okay, and moved on. She noticed that, filed it away. What about you? She reached for her glass. What do you do? What did you study? He leaned back in his chair. Harvard, MBA, then straight back to New York to take over the family operation. Import-export, 100 years of history behind it, the kind of company that had buried its competition and kept going. Stephanie reached for her water and kept her face neutral. 100-year-old New York family business. If they kept talking, she'd be willing to bet she already knew his name, or at least his world. My father was a hard man. Reuben's voice hadn't changed. Flatter, more careful, like something had been adjusted from the inside. Business first, always. Family was decoration. We all had our functions, discipline above everything else. He paused. Emotions, personal things, those were considered irrelevant. He turned his glass on the table once and stopped. His expression hadn't shifted, but his eyes had, like whatever he was describing was still in there, still running. She looked at him. I'm sorry. He tilted his head slightly. Why? For you. She didn't look away. It must have been hard. She turned her wine glass slowly, watching the light move through the burgundy. I think about it sometimes. All of this, everything we do, every decision we make, when you strip everything back, isn't it all just trying to feel something real? She looked up at him. I'm one of billions of people who've passed through this world. I think about my purpose, what I'm here for, why any of it means anything. Her thumb moved along the stem of the glass. Maybe we're just here to gain experience, to live out what we're handed, and all of it, comes down to what we feel. When we suppress that and just focus on function, on what we're supposed to do, she stopped. Maybe that's when we lose the whole point. Reuben was watching her with full attention, not polite, not waiting for a pause, actually listening. She became aware of the distance between them, the candlelight, his hands resting still against the linen. She'd leaned in slightly, hadn't noticed until now. He reached across the table and touched her fingers, lightly, his thumb moving once across her knuckles. You're an interesting person, Stephanie. He smiled, the real one, the brief one. I knew it when I saw you at the club in that denim jumpsuit. You weren't performing for anyone. The warmth in her face came fast and she looked down at the table. You're not interested in surfaces. You go deeper. His fingers stayed against hers, still. You keep things close. I like that too. She looked up at him. You don't know me yet. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. People are good at showing what they want you to see. You can't trust someone just because they seem a certain way. He leaned forward. When he spoke, his voice dropped, quiet, deliberate, meant for her. You can't trust the wrong person, but you can't know if someone is wrong without trying. His fingers closed around her hand, easy and certain. Life is always a risk. His eyes stayed on hers. So, come back to my place for a while. The view is worth it. I don't know you yet. She held his gaze. I don't even know your last name. He lifted her hand and brought it to his lips. His eyes stayed on hers the whole time. You just told me life is about experience. Quiet. Don't you want to find out? She felt it move through her before she could think her way around it. Her breath shifted. She held his gaze because looking away first would tell him something she wasn't ready to say. I'd like to take it slow. He smiled, quiet, certain, and stood. He moved to her chair and pulled it back. She rose, and for a moment they were very close, the candlelight between them, the open side of the restaurant letting in the night air off the water. Then they walked out together, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Stephanie wasn't thinking about what came next. She was just here, just this. She had no idea how dangerous that was. The road curved along the coast, the sea coming in dark flashes between the hills. Neither of them spoke. Stephanie had her hands folded in her lap, running the math she always ran when she'd already decided something and wanted to undo it. 2 days. He stepped in at a nightclub, pulled you out of the sea, and bought you dinner. That is the entire foundation of this. Then his hand moved from the gear shift and settled over hers, eyes on the road. No comment, no glance to check her reaction. Just his hand, warm and still, covering both of hers. Her teeth found her lower lip. Your place. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. She turned toward him. Let's go. He looked at her for a second, not surprised, like he'd been waiting for her to get there. Then he faced the road again, said nothing, which did not help. The villa sat at the end of a narrow lane, low and modern, positioned right at the water's edge. He opened the front door. The entry hall smelled like him. Lemon, bergamot, something cool underneath. Dark wood, stone surfaces, a long run of glass facing the sea. She walked in and stopped in the middle of the room. She genuinely had no idea what she was doing here. There's a terrace out back. He said it the way you'd say it to someone who needed a moment. He moved through to the kitchen, already at ease in every inch of it. I'll bring something out. She went through the glass door and stood at the railing. Below the terrace, a pier stretched out into the dark water. A speedboat was tied at the end of it, rocking in the swell, the lines taut. The breeze moved through her hair, warmer than it had any right to be this late. Her pulse was doing something she didn't appreciate. He came out a few minutes later with 2 glasses. She took hers and sipped. She looked at it. This isn't wine. Flat, almost accusatory. Tonic, lime. He set his glass down on the low table, glanced at her, and laughed, brief and quiet. A gentleman doesn't get a woman drunk in his own home. She laughed too, a real one, surprised out of her. Very gentlemanly. He tilted his head toward the wide sofa facing the sea. She sat. He sat beside her, close enough that their arms nearly touched. She looked at his profile, the line of his jaw, the way he held himself even at rest, and wondered, not for the first time, exactly how much of the world this man had already moved through. How old are you? Her voice came out softer than she intended. 34. He reached for his glass. Why? She shrugged, her eyes still on the water. You've had more time to figure things out. Maybe. His eyes stayed on the water. But you think in a way most people don't get to in twice the time. His hand moved toward her, deliberate, slowing as it neared her hair. His fingers traced down to her cheek and rested there lightly. Her lips parted before she could stop them. She reached up and took his hand, held it rather than moving it away. I don't have much experience with men. Her voice dropped, aimed more at the water than at him. I want you to know that. I'm a little nervous. Her thumb moved once across his knuckles. But I'm still here. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, barely a kiss, pulled back almost before it landed. His voice dropped low against her cheek. I would never hurt you. This time she was the one who leaned in. She found his lips again, and this time it held, soft but deliberate, a kiss that stayed. His hand came up to her jaw. Something lit through her from the center outward, past her ribs, into her hands. She'd spent 23 years without wanting anyone enough to call it that. She'd assumed it was just how she was wired. She'd been wrong. Her mind said, "Get up and go home," with total clarity. Her body had already chosen a completely different position on the matter. Reuben took both glasses and set them aside, offered his hand, and when she took it, he led her down the hall to the last door. He pushed it open, wide bed, dark linen, and along the far wall, floor-to-ceiling glass, the sea, the pier, the boat below, the dark water beyond. She looked at him, trying to read something in his expression. Just sleep. Steady, no pressure behind it. "I won't touch you. Think of it as a test." She laughed despite herself, nervous, slightly undone. A test of exactly what? The words came out dry, which wasn't entirely how she meant them. His fingers moved into her hair, slow through it. Then his thumb traced her lower lip. "That, you can hand over control and keep it at the same time. That being next to me doesn't cost you anything." His eyes on hers. "Just stay in what you feel. If this becomes something real, I need you to trust me first." She stood there and let that land. Interesting test. She let the words sit there. He sat on the edge of the bed, shrugged off his jacket, draped it over the chair. Shoes off, set aside. He stretched out on his back and looked up. The glass wall beside him held the dark water and the far scatter of coastal lights. Stephanie stood at the window. Below, the sea moved against the pier. Then she lay down beside him. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then she laughed. She couldn't help it. He turned his head. "What?" Low, almost amused. "I just—" She shook her head, a small laugh in her throat. "I genuinely cannot believe I'm doing this." He shifted onto his side. She turned too. Face to face in the dark, close enough to see his eyes clearly. Deep water green, the kind that shifts depending on the light around them. "What do you actually want?" His voice was low, his eyes steady on hers in the dark. "Out of your life." She smiled, small, a little sad. Then she turned onto her back and looked up at the ceiling. The glass wall held the sea, the lights, the dark. She was quiet for a moment. "To stand on my own, without owing anyone, without being owed." Her throat tightened. She swallowed past it. "To find somewhere that feels like mine." She let that one sit. "I'll know it when I'm there." Reuben had gone quiet, his eyes on her face, taking his time with it, the way someone does when they're actually listening and not just waiting for their turn to speak. "How will you know?" "Peace." She closed her eyes. "Wanting to stay. Being—" the corner of her mouth lifted. "Accepted, as I am." She opened her eyes and looked directly at him, at his eyes deeply. Her voice dropped to just above a whisper. "And being loved." He brought his lips to hers, barely touching. A brush. "You're a special person, Stephanie." He pulled her in closer, his arm firm around her. She let him. She traced her fingers along his forearm, down to where his cuff was rolled to the elbow, her fingertips moving over the warmth of his skin underneath. He buried his face against her neck. She felt him breathe her in, slow and deliberate, like he was taking his time with it. She realized she hadn't felt like this in longer than she could name. Safe and still, in the arms of a man she'd known for 2 days. She smiled at the ceiling. Her voice came out soft, almost to herself. "What are you doing?" He lifted his head, his eyes finding hers and holding. "Discovering each other." His voice was low, close. "When two people actually connect, every sense, every thought, it all runs at once. I like your touch." His fingers moved along her shoulder. "Your scent, your words, the walls you haven't brought down yet." He turned her face gently toward him and kissed her again, slow, his thumb at her jaw. "And your taste. I think I like you quite a lot." The want that had been building in her chest all evening came into sharp focus. She turned her back to him. A decision, not a retreat. He smiled. She felt it against her hair. His hand found her waist and drew her in, her back meeting his chest. His lips found her neck, one soft press. "The person who's hard to find," he whispered, "is the one whose arms make you want to stay." Her fingers found his hands where they rested against her stomach, and she set her palm over them. "Right now, there's nothing above this. Nothing." She looked at the sea through the glass, the pier, the boat, the dark water moving in long, quiet intervals, and let the sound of it carry her. She came awake all at once, body snapping upright, heart racing. Reuben stirred immediately. "Hey." His voice was rough with sleep, low enough that it stayed between them. "You're safe. Right here." He drew her back against him. His hand settled at the back of her head, fingers pressing lightly into her hair. "Bad dream?" he asked quietly. The words came out before she'd fully gathered them. "Reuben." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Being close to me could get you hurt." He went still. "My father is dangerous. I'm running from him. He will find me eventually." She turned toward him. His eyes watched her in the dark, steady and patient. "He wants to arrange my marriage to a man I've never met. He wants to take every choice I have left." Her voice dropped on the last words. "If we stop this now, before it goes any further, it would be better for both of us." He looked at her for a long moment without moving. "I'm not afraid of anyone." His voice was calm, like it wasn't something he needed to prove. Her voice cracked. "Take me home. Before I can't ask you to." A faint smile touched his mouth. He shook his head. "Not tonight." Her voice fell to a whisper. "But it could already be too late." His hand came up to her jaw, tilting her face toward him. "Then I'll fight for you." She stared at him. "Reuben, you don't even know me." It sounded closer to a plea than she wanted. His eyes stayed on hers in the dark. "I know enough." She reached up and took his face in her hands. She didn't think about it, just his jaw between her palms, warm and rough, and then her mouth on his. Not tentative. She kissed him like she'd been fighting the urge all night and had finally stopped trying. He let her lead for 3 seconds, long enough to feel the urgency in it. Then his arm came around her waist, and he rolled her underneath him in one smooth motion, the air leaving her lungs in a soft rush. She pulled at his shirt, fingers finding the buttons and working them open while his hands moved to the zipper at her back and drew it down slowly, like he had all the time in the world and intended to use it. When his mouth found her skin, she stopped thinking altogether. Her fingers twisted into his hair. Her spine curved without permission, a sound slipping from her throat that she barely recognized. She'd been careful her whole life, careful with words, with space, with who she let close. None of that existed right now. "Reuben." His name broke softly against his shoulder. "I want you." She pressed her palm flat against his chest, pulling him closer. "Don't stop." He went still. For a moment he just looked at her, both of them breathing the same air in the dark. Then he lowered his forehead to hers. "No." His voice was quiet, stripped down to something simple and certain. "Not tonight." "I'm ready." She shifted closer, trying to make him understand. "I want you to know me." His thumb moved slowly along her jaw. "Not like this. Not in one night, because it feels right in the dark." He held her gaze. "Your first time won't be this, Stephanie. I won't let it." She opened her mouth to argue. Instead, his lips brushed across her collarbone, soft and deliberate. The patience in the movement made her head fall back, her chest pulling tight all at once, pleasure tangled with something close to grief, until a single tear slipped from the corner of her eye. He felt it before she could wipe it away. He lifted his head and kissed it from her cheek without a word. Then he pulled her against him, her head settling over his heart, his arm wrapping around her as his fingers moved slowly through her hair. "Sleep," he murmured. "In the morning, we'll figure it out." She lay there, listening to his heartbeat slow, breathing in lemon and bergamot and salt, and felt something settle quietly into her bones. Not happiness exactly, quieter than that. Like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had, just for tonight, set it down. She woke to light and the wrong side of the bed empty. She pulled the cover back, looked down and let it drop. Her dress was somewhere on the floor. She was in her underwear. She put her hands over her face and pressed. She hadn't been drunk on tequila last night. She'd been drunk on him, and right now, with morning coming through the glass and her clothes missing, all she wanted was to be back where she'd been an hour ago. The door opened. Reuben came in, bare-chested, dark trousers, hair still undone from sleep. He carried a glass of orange juice and looked entirely too composed for a man who'd just devastated her. "Good morning, beautiful." He set it on the nightstand. "I made breakfast." She looked at him. A slow flush moved up her throat. "Good morning," she said, and hated how soft it came out. He sat on the edge of the mattress and studied her for a moment. Then he hooked 2 fingers under her chin, tilting her face up, and kissed her. Brief, warm, certain. He pulled back just enough to look at her. "Last night was extraordinary." He said it simply, like a fact. "Now get up. Breakfast is getting cold." The terrace table faced the water, omelette, sliced fruit, a pot of coffee, 2 glasses of juice, already sweating in the morning sun. The view was almost offensively beautiful. Stephanie looked at the spread and back at him. "This is quite a lot for a man." He pulled a t-shirt over his head and caught her tone before it was even finished. "The world's greatest chefs are men, historically speaking." She wrinkled her nose. "That argument is literally about Michelin stars being distributed in a way that systematically—" "This will not be our first argument, Stephanie." He was already laughing, and she was too before she could stop it. She reached for her juice, still smiling, and looked out at the sea. The villa sat so close to the water she could hear it. She thought about how long she could stay somewhere like this before it stopped feeling borrowed. When she glanced back, Reuben was already watching her. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "In this place?" He paused, refilling his coffee. "A few weeks, actually. I used to stay in hotels when I came through." He set the pot down. "Decided it made more sense to have somewhere that was mine." She nodded slowly and let the silence sit. "Stephanie." His voice shifted. Quieter now, no humor left in it. "Yesterday was one of the best days I've had in a long time. Every part of it." His eyes moved over her face. "I want you close to me. I want you with me." She smiled. She couldn't stop it, but felt it pull against something heavier inside her. "I have to go back to New York," he said. She turned her juice glass in her hands. "When will you come back?" "I don't know." He held her gaze. For a moment he said nothing more. "Which is why I want you to come with me." She set down her fork. "I can't." She kept her voice even. "The moment I land in the US, my father will find me." He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "When he does, I'll be right there." "Reuben," she exhaled. "Everything has moved so fast. I want to be with you, I do. But I'm not ready to walk back into that country. I'm trying to build something here and—" Her voice dropped. "I'd be putting you in danger. You don't know my father." He pushed back his chair and stood. He reached out his hand, and after a moment she took it and stood with him. He cupped her face in both hands. He kissed her once, slow, and when he pulled back, his eyes stayed on hers. "Tell me what you felt last night." Low, direct, in my arms. "Did you feel it? Even for a second? Like there was somewhere you could belong?" He drew her hair back from her face, fingers careful, watching her. "Did you feel safe with me, Stephanie?" She swallowed, and then she nodded. He leaned in until his lips were at her ear. For a moment he said nothing. Then his voice came out quiet and absolute. "Then I'm not letting you go." She stood there with his hands in her hair and his mouth at her ear and thought, he means it. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that Reuben had known her name before he'd ever said his. The whole morning had moved too fast. Stephanie understood that, even as she let it keep moving. his hand in hers, walking out of the villa, the sun already warm off the water, the way she'd woken up an hour ago, not wanting to move at all. She'd spent years building careful distance between herself and people. In 2 days, this man had walked straight through all of it. She was still warm from it, which was the problem. Ruben's phone went off while she was still thinking about that. He took 2 steps away and answered, listened for maybe 5 seconds, his voice shifting into something clipped. "Get it all ready. Everything we need." He checked his watch, told whoever it was 2 hours, then ended the call and turned back with the same easy expression he'd had before it rang, like nothing in him could be disturbed. She stood where she was. "Can you take me home?" He crossed the room and held out his hand, and she took it without thinking too hard about why. Outside, the Maserati sat where it had been the night before. Beside it, a black SUV she didn't recognize, a driver already at the curb. Stephanie glanced between the 2 vehicles and then at Ruben. "You have a driver?" He looked at her, faintly amused. "When I need one." The driver pulled the rear door open without being asked, and they got in. In the back seat, Ruben's hand settled over hers. The city moved past the windows in the morning light, all pale stone and open squares, and she let herself stay close to how the earlier hours had felt. His voice against her ear, the sea, the weight of waking up beside someone and not immediately wanting to leave. She'd almost forgotten what that felt like. Then she looked at the road. Maria's apartment was north. She knew the turns by now, the narrow street with the blue tile corner, the bakery at the last intersection. The car didn't take that turn. The streets were wider here, moving away from the residential center, and something in her chest registered it before her mind caught up. "Where are we going?" She kept her voice easy. "I have a surprise for you." He ran his thumb slowly across the back of her hand, and she smiled. The careful kind, the one that didn't show what was happening underneath it. "I'm not really a surprise person." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, eyes on her face, taking his time with it. "I don't want to say goodbye either." Low, against her skin. Her pulse moved before she could stop it. And underneath that, something else tightened. Slow, cold, the way a room gets colder before you understand why. The SUV turned. The signs changed. She recognized the wider highway opening up ahead, the city thinning out on either side into something more directional. Her stomach dropped. She pulled her hand back. "I'm serious, Ruben. Where are we going?" He reached forward and slid the partition closed between them and the driver. The city noise cut out completely. Stephanie pressed her back against the door. Her pulse was going fast now, and wrong. "Where are you taking me?" Not a question anymore. "I'm serious. I can't go to New York with you. Not like this. Not right now." Ruben looked at her, steady and patient, like a man who had already arrived at the end of a conversation she was still trying to start. Her breathing went shallow, the club, the beach, the boat appearing out of nowhere. 2 days of things she'd read as coincidence because she'd wanted to. Something cold moved through her, slow and clarifying, the way real understanding sometimes arrives not as a thought, but as a physical fact. She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "Who are you, Ruben?" Quiet, careful. "Did my father send you?" He reached over and touched her jaw, the same way he had in the dark 3 hours ago, his thumb moving along her cheekbone with that settled patience. And his voice came out low and certain. "I'm the man who's going to keep you safe. Who's going to make sure you get everything you actually want." Like he'd already thought through every version of this conversation, like he wasn't afraid of any of them. The SUV slowed, the engine dropped into silence. Then the car stopped. Through the window, a private terminal, a jet, the tarmac empty except for ground staff moving in the distance. Stephanie put both hands flat against the door behind her. "Are you kidnapping me?" He didn't look away from her. "I wouldn't use that word, but you're not staying in Barcelona, and I'm not leaving without you. I told you that this morning." Everything landed at once. The club, the beach, last night, all of it. She felt her throat close. "Tell me who you are, right now." "You want to know who I am?" His voice stayed low, almost gentle. "I'm the man you slept next to last night. The man you told your secrets to, in the dark. He held her gaze without flinching. My full name is Ruben Leonardo Castiello. Your father and I have an arrangement, and I'm the man he made it with. He paused, just long enough for it to settle. The man you're going to marry. The driver got out. Stephanie looked at Ruben, and for a moment she couldn't find words at all, only the burning behind her eyes and the flat, terrible clarity of it. You lied to me. Her voice came out flat and quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't calm, each word placed down carefully, like she was afraid of what happened if they broke. Everything we talked about, the trust, belonging somewhere, all of it. Her voice cracked on that last part just slightly. You lied. He didn't reach for her. No anger in his voice, no defensiveness, which was somehow worse than either. No. I got to know you. If you hadn't genuinely mattered to me, I'd be on a plane back to New York alone and the deal would be dead. But I can't go back without you now, and you already know why. She shoved him back with both hands. You broke everything. I can't trust a word you've said to me. Still calm. Still that bottomless calm. You can. I didn't pretend to be someone I'm not. What you saw was me. All of it. You got closer to the real version of me in 2 days than most people do in 20 years. His voice stayed level, quiet with certainty. We fell in love. Now we're going to get married. She laughed. One short, wet sound. He got out. The driver already had her door open, and Ruben stood at the edge of it, hand loose at his side. Please. One word, and something in it cost him. She looked at the jet, at the tarmac, at the complete absence of anywhere else to go. She got out, and when he reached for her hand, she pulled away, so he moved to her waist instead, firm, not rough, and walked her toward the stairs. My passport, she said, keeping her eyes forward. My things. Taken care of this morning. Maria knows where you are. She reached into her bag and already knew before her fingers found nothing. You took my phone? You'll get it back when we land. His hand stayed at her back, steady. Inside the jet, the flight attendants greeted them at the top of the stairs. Welcome, Mr. Castiello, and Ruben gestured toward a wide double seat near the front. Stephanie walked past it without looking at him and dropped into a single seat at the back. She closed her eyes. 9 years of careful distance from her father's world, from men who moved through everything like they already owned it, and the one she'd finally let through had been exactly that. The universe had a vicious sense of humor. If you want to rest, there's a bedroom in back. His voice came from somewhere near the front of the cabin. The crew can get you anything you need. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Don't talk to me. Whatever happened between us, it's done. You will never have me. He smiled, quiet and certain, and she wanted to look away from it. No, Stephanie. Everything is just starting. He stood where he was, looking at her, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped, lower, rougher, like something he was done keeping controlled. You're going to fall even harder, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing everything it takes to make you happy. Then he turned and moved to the double seat at the front of the cabin and sat down. The engines built, and the jet began to move. Stephanie turned to the window. Barcelona slid past. The water, the morning light, the terrace where she'd sat 2 hours ago with her coffee, believing she might have found somewhere safe. She watched it until the sky swallowed it whole. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Ruben tried 3 times. Are you hungry? She kept her eyes on the window, knees pulled toward her chest, the clouds below flat and white and reading like nothing. A few minutes passed. Do you need anything? She watched a gap open between 2 cloud banks and close again, then quieter, without much expectation left in it. How long are you planning to keep this up, Stephanie? Nothing from her. Her eyes burned. She blinked once, and that was as far as she was going to let herself go. She flagged down a flight attendant and asked for tequila. The first shot went down fast. the second too. By the third she could feel the distance opening. Not happiness, just distance, the way tequila always worked for her. She ordered a fourth, then a fifth, barely waiting for the glass to touch the tray before reaching for it. Reuben got up from his seat across the cabin. He'd moved there at some point, giving her space or taking his own, she hadn't decided which, and crossed to her. He lifted the shot glass out of her hand before it reached her lips and set it on the tray. "That's enough." His voice was even, not unkind, which made it worse. "Getting drunk isn't going to change anything." She looked at where the glass had been. There was nothing left to do. Eventually, he went back to his seat. She woke to dim overhead light and the low hum of engines. At some point she'd moved. She was stretched out on the bed at the back of the jet, still in her clothes, covers kicked to one side. The tequila had faded to a dull ache behind her eyes. She lay still a moment, took stock, then turned her head. Reuben was asleep beside her. T-shirt, trousers, one arm loose at his side. The calculation had gone out of his face. Just a face. She stared at the ceiling. "I hate him." The thought was clean, and she meant it. How did I let this happen? How did I sit on that terrace and feel safe and tell him things I've never said out loud? How did I nearly... She stopped there, made herself go back, made herself finish it honestly. I nearly gave myself to him completely. I was ready. I wanted to. The uncomfortable part, the part she didn't want to sit with, was the rest of it. He was the one who stopped. She looked at him again. He was still, infuriatingly, easy to look at. She was angry at herself for it. She got one knee off the mattress before his hand closed around her wrist. "Stay a while." His voice was rough with sleep, low. His eyes, when they opened, were that deep moss green, and she hated that it still did something to her. "We have a few hours. Talk to me." She looked down at his hand on her wrist, then pulled free. "Don't touch me again. Ever. I'm not marrying you. And the moment we land, I don't want to see your face." She got up, straightened her clothes, and walked out without looking back. She didn't trust herself to. She took the first open seat in the front cabin and put her hands in her lap and watched the clouds outside the window go dark as the hours passed, and didn't let herself think about anything at all until the descent began. The wheels touched down hard, and she was already on her feet before the jet had fully slowed, one hand on the seat back to steady herself. Reuben came up from the bedroom and she didn't look at him, just moved past him and down the stairs and onto the tarmac, into air that smelled like exhaust and asphalt, and, underneath it, something she recognized without wanting to. New York. A black car waited on the tarmac. The driver had her door open before she reached it. Behind the first car sat a second, darker, broader, the kind she'd grown up seeing outside every restaurant and school recital and family dinner that ran like a negotiation. She kept her face neutral and got in. Reuben settled beside her. They didn't speak. Outside the window, New York moved past. The skyline she'd spent 9 years keeping an ocean away from, familiar in a way she'd trained herself not to feel. The car turned into a neighborhood that got quieter and heavier with each block, streets wider, houses set further back behind iron and old hedges. Then the gates came up, high, unapologetic. 4 men at the entrance, their eyes moving across the car with a practiced sweep she recognized from the back seats of her childhood. She let out a short, dry sound. "This is the world I left, and I've come full circle." The car rolled through. She turned to Reuben. "Why am I here?" Level, no heat in it. "You could have taken me to my father's house. That would have at least been honest." He looked at her steadily, a muscle moving once along his jaw. "You were my girlfriend in Barcelona. Here, you're my fiancé. The wedding is in a week." She held his gaze, waiting. His voice didn't change. "You'll be where you're supposed to be, with me." She took that in, sat with it for a moment. Then, quietly, each word placed with care. "Reuben Leonardo Castiello, every single moment you spend near me, I will make sure you regret bringing me here." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he did, his voice came out lower, almost careful. What happened to the woman I met 3 days ago? She was sharp and composed and actually interesting. Stephanie was still watching her own reflection in the glass when she spoke. Congratulations. You killed her. She was halfway to the entrance when she saw the luggage, her bags, lined up along the front steps like they'd been there waiting. She stopped walking. Then she turned and looked straight at him. My phone. Her voice came out flat and hard, the kind of quiet that doesn't leave room for negotiation. He reached into his jacket and set it in her palm without a word. She pocketed it and walked ahead. Behind her she heard him. 2 slow steps, then nothing. She could feel him watching, head tilted. That smile. She kept moving. The door opened before she reached it. A wide foyer opened up. High ceilings, afternoon light pooling across the floors. 4 staff lined along the entry, with their heads dipped. Welcome back, Mr. Castiello. Then heels, fast, purposeful, getting louder. She came from deeper in the house, late 20s, long dark hair, a posture that had never once second-guessed itself. Her eyes found Reuben first and her face lit. Leo. She was already crossing toward him. You didn't take me to Barcelona. I've been going out of my mind in this house for a week. She stopped. Her gaze moved to Stephanie, traveled over her once, quick, thorough, and her arms folded across her chest. Now I get it. Is this our runaway bride? Reuben stepped forward and kissed the top of her head. Then he turned to Stephanie. This is my sister Carolina. He glanced back at Carolina, brief, level, the look of someone who means what comes next. I hope you two get along. Carolina lifted one shoulder toward him. If you say so. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Stefani had made a decision. She looked at Carolina now and let a slow, warm smile come onto her face, the kind she could produce on command, full and convincing. Hi, I'm Stephanie Gambetta. She let it settle. The woman your brother brought here under a different name. I'm not thrilled to be standing in a house that represents everything I've spent 9 years putting distance between myself and I have no interest in making friends with anyone in it. The smile stayed a half-second longer than it should have, then dropped clean. Wanted to be up front. Carolina's eyebrows went up. She turned to Reuben with open appreciation. Leo, you found an actual nightmare. You're seriously marrying her? Reuben's mouth pressed flat. He worked to keep it there. We fell in love, and love, sometimes it goes like this. His eyes moved to Stephanie and stayed. Don't let how she's talking right now fool you. She's one of the sharpest people I know. Stephanie looked straight back at him. Leo. She used it the same way Carolina had. Easy, without ceremony, like she'd been doing it for years. I want to see my father, and I need somewhere to be alone. I'm done with this conversation. Carolina looked at her brother. You're going to let her talk to you like that? No one talks to you like that. Come with me, Stephanie. Reuben's voice carried no edge at all. I'll show you your room. They went up without speaking, Reuben a step ahead, Stephanie behind him with her arms crossed. At the far end of the upstairs corridor, he opened a door. The room was large. One wall of windows looking out over the garden, light coming in long and level across a bed that took up most of the far wall. The furniture was the kind chosen by someone who'd thought about it. She stood in the doorway and took it in. Reuben moved to the window. I had this ready for you. He turned back. The room next to mine is through that door. He let a moment pass. Get some rest. Tomorrow I'm taking you to look at wedding dresses. She laughed. A real one. Brief and humorless. I've been saying it since Barcelona. I'm not marrying you. We can keep doing this, or you can start hearing me. He crossed the room in 4 steps. His hand closed around her waist and drew her toward him, not rough but final, the way a conversation ends. She lifted her chin. His other hand came up to her face, thumb resting along her cheekbone, and she felt the contradiction of it, the grip at her waist, the careful way he held her jaw. Stephanie. Lower now, stripped of everything except what he meant. With you, I was Reuben. I'm still trying to stay that way. His thumb moved once against her cheek. But in this house, I'm Leonardo Castiello. Don't test my patience. She pressed her hands against his chest and tried to step back. He brought her slightly closer instead. "Ruben is who I am with the people I love. I'm still giving you that." His eyes didn't move from hers. "But push me, and Leonardo is who you'll get." Her hand stayed flat against his chest. "As far as I can tell," her voice came out even, almost conversational, "you already are." The muscle along his jaw shifted. Something quieter moved through his eyes. A man recalculating. He released her, stepped back, adjusted his jacket with one hand. "Dinner at 7. I want you downstairs." He walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. "If you're not there, I'll come up and bring you down myself." The door closed. She stood in the middle of the room without moving, then her face just stopped holding. The tears came fast, the kind that don't wait, and she didn't fight them. She sank onto the edge of the bed and let them go while she dug the phone from her pocket with both hands and set it to charge, watching the screen blink on. She needed Maria's voice, and her father was somewhere in this city. He'd know she was here by now, if he didn't already. 6:55. She'd changed into shorts and a worn t-shirt, hair still loose from the flight. She looked at herself in the mirror and decided that was fine. More than fine. Let them look. "I've been losing my mind since this morning." Maria's voice came through the phone pressed between her shoulder and her ear, tight with worry that had been building all day. "2 men showed up, Stephanie. They were polite about it. Said you were going to New York with Ruben Castiello and they needed to collect your things. I didn't know what to do. I just let them." "You did the right thing." She smoothed the front of her shirt in the mirror, not really looking at the shirt. "Don't worry about it." "But Stephanie, that man, the club, the beach, dinner, he was the one you were supposed to marry this whole time?" "Yes." She kept her eyes on her own face in the mirror while she answered. "And you had no idea?" "No." She shifted the phone to her other hand. Maria went quiet a moment. "You really liked him, though. When you told me that day, after the boat, on the beach, I could hear it in your voice. You were—" "I know what I was." She looked at her reflection. What looked back wasn't quite herself. It was him, standing with his hands in his pockets and those dark green eyes watching her, the way they'd watched her in every room they'd shared. She turned away from the mirror. "It doesn't matter. I'm getting out of this." "You don't sound like yourself." She almost laughed. "Maybe I never was, Maria. I've been running since I was 14. That's done now." She picked up the phone properly, moved toward the door. "I have to go. Dinner with the family. I intend to make it memorable." Maria's laugh came out small and worried. "Call me after." She hung up, stood at the door for 1 second, then she opened it. Ruben was right there, leaning against the hallway wall with his hands in his pockets, close enough that she almost walked into him. He looked her over, starting at her feet, making his way up, taking his time about it. She watched him hold back a smile and mostly lose. In shorts and a t-shirt, she probably looked considerably younger than 23, and he found this funnier than he should have. He tilted his head. "I already told you. I like you like this." She looked straight at him, giving him nothing, then stepped around him and headed for the stairs. His quiet footsteps followed a moment later. The dining room table was set for 4, candles lit, service already moving. Carolina sat near the window. On the far side, closer to where Stephanie entered, a woman in her early 60s rose slightly from her chair, elegant, composed, a kind of settled authority in the way she held herself. She looked at Stephanie with curiosity, nothing sharper. Ruben came in behind her. "Stephanie, my mother, Lucia Castiello." Lucia's face warmed. "Come sit beside me, sweetheart. You've had a long few days." She gestured to the chair at her right. "I had the kitchen prepare Italian tonight. I hope there's something you'll like." Carolina looked Stephanie up and down from across the table, slow, thorough, saying everything without opening her mouth. Stephanie pulled out the chair next to Lucia and sat. She looked at the spread on the table and smiled pleasantly. "I actually prefer Asian food." She knew exactly what she was doing. The woman had been nothing but warm, and she'd said it anyway. She was done softening things. Lucia's eyebrows lifted, just briefly. Then she smiled with real ease. "Then tomorrow, we'll do Asian." Nothing wounded in it, She reached for her wine. Reuben settled at the head of the table. He shook his napkin out and laid it across his lap, and his eyes, from the moment he sat, stayed on Stephanie. Steady, patient, that particular attention of his that didn't ask permission. "You were abroad for a long time." Lucia turned toward her. "Computer engineering?" When Stephanie confirmed it, Lucia's expression carried real interest. "Women doing that work. It matters. You must have put in real hours." Stephanie smiled and didn't fill the silence. Carolina set her fork down with a careful click. "Of course, once she's married, foundation boards, the household, charity work, that's where the energy goes in this family." She kept her voice pleasant. Barely. Stephanie turned to her. "What do you do, Carolina?" Her own voice stayed warm, conversational. "You're still here, so I'm guessing you're not married yet. Leo hasn't matched you up with the right business arrangement." She held her gaze. "Give it time." The table went cold. Reuben put his cutlery down and looked at her across the length of the table, direct, no warmth in it. Carolina turned to her mother. "I told you, education and manners are two different things." Stephanie smiled at her, small, calm, like she'd just learned exactly how the game worked. Then Lucia's hand came over hers, light on the table, and the room seemed to rearrange itself around the quiet of it. "I knew your mother, Stephanie." Just that, simply placed. "Giselle. Foundation meetings, the riding club on the east side. I watched you with the horses when you were small. We'd talk while you worked with them." Something tightened in Stephanie's throat, fast and involuntary. 2 years, and her mother's name still did that, reached straight past whatever she'd built up and closed around something unprotected. "She was meticulous about raising you, graceful, sharper than most people realized. I valued her friendship." Lucia's hand pressed lightly. "When I heard it would be you, that Leonardo would marry Giselle's daughter, I was glad. Genuinely." She glanced across the table. Reuben was watching Stephanie. Lucia held it for a moment, her son's face, what was in it, and understood what she needed to. She turned back. "You can't outrun fate, darling. You can only face it." Her hand stayed over Stephanie's. "And fate has a way of finding you hardest exactly where you said never." She let that land. "Give yourself some time. Instead of running, look at what you might still be able to shape." Stephanie looked at her. Something in her chest pulled in a direction she didn't want it to go. She didn't want to feel warmth toward this woman. She didn't want to feel anything toward any of them. Not toward this house, not toward Reuben, not toward his family. Carolina had made that easy. Cold, deliberate, a locked door. Exactly the kind of obstacle she knew how to handle. But Lucia. She looked at the lasagna on her plate and said nothing for the rest of the meal. Her future mother-in-law had shown her hand tonight. Not with force, not with pressure, just wait. Just the quiet, settled kind of wisdom that didn't need to announce itself. That was going to be the harder problem. Stephanie pushed her chair back before the coffee came out. "I'm exhausted from the flight." True enough, and the cleanest exit she was going to get before Lucia found another angle in. Lucia's eyes lifted. "We're glad you're here, Stephanie." Warm and completely genuine, which somehow made it worse. Stephanie kept the smile until she cleared the doorway. The bathroom filled with steam fast. She made the water as hot as it would go and climbed in before it finished running, sank down until the heat hit her shoulders and pushed her earbuds in. Whatever came up first, it didn't matter. She just needed something between her skull and the last hour. The steam rose and the music played, and her shoulders finally came down. She was almost gone, drifting somewhere between the heat and the bass in her ears, when something made her open her eyes. She didn't know why. Some small change in the air or the light, or nothing she could name. She looked up. Reuben was standing in the bathroom doorway, arms folded, shoulder easy against the frame, watching her with the patience of someone who'd been there long enough to stop waiting. There was something at the corner of his mouth she did not appreciate. She pulled one earbud out. The water suddenly felt very transparent. "Get out." I knocked. His head tilted slightly. "No answer. I thought you'd left through a window." His eyes moved over her, slow, not rushed about it, and came back to her face. "I should also mention, I appear to have just seen you naked. First and last time." She kept her voice even. "Leave." The towel was across the room. She looked at it, and he'd already seen her do the math. He crossed to the rack, lifted it, and turned his back without being asked. She stood up, stepped out, pulled the towel from his hands, and wrapped it around herself before he could turn around. He turned around anyway. The room had gotten small. The steam made it smaller. He was close enough that she caught his scent through all of it, lemon and bergamot and something underneath that she'd first noticed on a beach in Barcelona days ago when she'd had no idea what she was walking into. Her body knew it before she could stop the recognition. Something pulled low and specific, and she had no use for it at all. She shut it down and kept her face still. He looked at her for a moment, then past her. "I'm taking you to your father in the morning." His voice dropped into its quieter register, the one that meant the conversation was already over. "Just the two of you. No one else. But after, you come back here. You've said what you came to say." She pulled the towel tighter. "Now go." He nodded and left. She stood in the cooling steam and listened to him cross the bedroom, heard the door and then the hallway going quiet. And then nothing. By morning her stomach was already doing something she refused to name. She hadn't gone down for breakfast. She'd stayed in bed, past the point of pretending to sleep, staring at the ceiling, then sat on the edge of the mattress and let herself feel it, the low, particular dread of a thing you've been putting off for 2 years. Her father. The last time she'd seen him was at her mother's funeral, standing across the grave in November. They exchanged maybe 4 words, none of them worth saying. She had a car to the airport before the reception was over and she hadn't turned around once. One of the household staff knocked, voice careful through the door. "Mr. Castiello is waiting, miss. The car is ready." Stephanie stood up and went to the mirror. She looked at herself for a long moment. She knew this version. The careful one, the quiet one, the girl who kept her head down and her grades up and her mouth shut for 9 years and called that safety. That girl had gotten her through a lot. She'd also gotten her here, standing in a stranger's house in New York with a wedding 6 days away. "You've done enough," she thought. "I've got it now." She undid 2 buttons on her shirt, stepped into her heeled sandals, shook her hair out until it had weight and volume, found the lipstick at the bottom of her bag, the deep red one she'd bought in Barcelona on a day when she felt like someone else entirely. She uncapped it, pressed her lips together, looked at her reflection. There she was. Reuben was waiting by the car. He looked up when she came through the front door, and she watched his attention catch. Slower across the open collar, the lipstick, before he pulled it back. Not quickly enough. "Motivated morning." There was something low and amused in his voice. "Good morning." Stephanie walked past him to the car, opened the door herself, and got in. He came around and sat beside her. The gates began to move. A few seconds of quiet, the engine running, the street opening up ahead of them. Then, "You going to be like this the whole drive?" Stephanie watched New York pass through the windshield. The city looked exactly how she remembered it, and she wasn't sure she'd ever forgiven it for that. "You haven't seen anything yet?" The car turned into the drive, and Stephanie's stomach pulled tight before her brain had finished processing where they were. She recognized everything. The iron lanterns, the dead strip of grass along the stone wall, the way the gravel sat under the tires. All of it so embedded in her that 9 years of distance hadn't touched it. That was the worst part. She'd expected it to feel foreign. The mansion sat the way it always had. Heavy. Grey. Built to keep weather out and everything else in. She'd grown up inside those walls until her mother put her on a plane to Zurich at 14. And standing in front of it now, she understood, maybe for the first time, exactly why. Reuben came around the car and stopped beside her. She hadn't moved. His hand came to her shoulder, light. "You all right?" She pulled herself straight. "Of course." She held his gaze without letting anything through. This is my home." He didn't say anything to that, but he kept his hand there a moment, and she was almost grateful before she caught herself. The foyer was different. New staff, a floor runner she'd never seen, the smell of something cleaned too recently. The house had always been quiet, but this was a different kind, hollowed out, like a room where someone used to sing. Her mother had loved this house. Stephanie had never understood it. Tony Gambetta had all the warmth of stone, and yet Giselle had moved through these rooms like she'd chosen them freely, while spending years keeping her daughter at a careful distance from the man she'd married. Same house, different world. Stephanie used to call that love. She wasn't sure anymore. She was still standing in the middle of the foyer when she heard him. Footsteps on the staircase. Measured, deliberate. She looked up, and there was Tony Gambetta descending in a dark suit, older than she remembered, something softer in the jaw, more grey at the temples, but carrying himself with the weight of a man who'd never apologized for taking up space. His attention went to Reuben first. "Mr. Castiello." His voice warmed by a degree, smooth and deliberate. "It's always a pleasure to have you here." "I'm here for Stephanie." Reuben's tone stayed level, polite, and completely final. His eyes moved to her once, brief, then back. Tony let the moment land, then turned. His expression shifted into something softer, performed. "My daughter." He crossed the foyer and put his arms around her. 3 seconds, the hug of a man who'd been told fathers do this. She felt the stiffness in him and matched it. Over his shoulder, she caught Reuben watching her. He saw more than she wanted him to. She kept her face still and stepped back. "I want to speak with him alone." She looked straight at Reuben, not a request. Reuben nodded once. "Car will be back in an hour." He glanced at Tony, briefly, saying nothing, and walked out without another word. The second the door closed, Tony's face changed. He looked at her the way he always had when they were alone, calculating, already slightly disappointed. "Running from me." Quiet to himself. "Do you understand what that cost me?" Stephanie almost laughed. "It's lovely to know I was missed." She turned to take in the room. Without her mother, it had turned bleak. Same furniture, same high ceilings, the life gone out of all of it. Giselle Gambetta used to put flowers on the mantel. There were no flowers now. Tony touched her elbow. "Come." He guided her into the study, closed the door, moved behind his desk like it was armor. She sat across from him. Same as always, she thought. The furniture between us. "Tell me what happened." She kept her eyes on the desk between them. "The man you made your deal with found me, lied to me, and brought me here by force." She looked up. "Happy?" Tony unfolded his arms and set them flat on the desk. "This arrangement was necessary. You disappeared before I could explain. I never intended to simply hand you over." Her throat moved around what she wanted to say. "What exactly did you intend?" He sat back. "The Castiellos have blocked my business for years. They're stronger. To get what I needed, I had to offer something." A pause in which he seemed to be choosing words. "You were the offer. But there's a difference between an offer and a delivery." She let that sit, looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means I always had another plan. Easy, obvious. The tone of a man who expected trust without earning it." He held her gaze across the desk. "Before any contract is signed, I'll have you out." Stephanie studied his face, the face she'd known her whole life and never quite been able to read. "How?" "You don't need that level of detail." He stood, which was how he always ended things, by physically deciding they were over. He came around the desk and pressed a kiss to her forehead, brief and practiced. "Stay in that house, be civil, give me a couple days. After this is done, come home. Real work, in your field. You've been gone long enough." She opened her mouth and his phone rang. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and went very still for half a second. A change so small she almost missed it. "Mr. Rossi?" His voice dropped into a register she didn't recognize, respectful in a way Tony Gambetta was not naturally respectful of anyone. His eyes flicked to her once. She walked out. The door closed. She stood in the hallway, the house pressing in around her. Her father had a plan. Tony Gambetta, who'd offered her to the Castiellos like a line item, had a plan to get her back. She had no idea if that made things better or worse. Stephanie sat on the edge of the bed and let the room be quiet. This had been her room, same window, same afternoon light. She'd expected something, recognition, the pull of familiarity. Instead, it felt like any room, four walls that remembered her the way furniture remembered anyone who'd sat in it long enough. Her mother had made this house livable. Without Giselle, it had become what it always was underneath. Tony Gambetta's house, built around Tony Gambetta's life. The only time in years she'd felt like she belonged somewhere was the night she'd spent in Reuben's arms. That rare, stupid sense of here. She'd also had no idea who he was, she thought. So much for instinct. Someone knocked. "Miss Gambetta, your fiancé's car is here. He's waiting at the front." Fiancé. Stephanie turned that word over for a second. All of New York already knew, apparently. She checked her watch. Exactly 1 hour. The man kept his word. The car was empty. Just the driver and a cream envelope on the seat. She opened it. A black card, no name, and a note in his handwriting, "For whatever you need." She dropped it on the seat, turned to the window. "As if I'd lower myself," she murmured, more to the glass than to anyone. The city passed. Then a thought arrived sideways, almost amused. Wasn't I supposed to be trouble? She glanced back at the card, picked it up. An idea hit her. She had the phone out before she'd fully formed it, Maria's name already on the screen. "You're working from home anyway." Voice easy, like this was obvious. "Come early for the wedding. Flight and hotel are on me." Maria laughed and said yes. Something loosened in Stephanie's chest, the first real thing she'd felt all day, and she looked at the black card still in her hand. "Then I'm booking you a ticket for tomorrow." She ended the call, turned the card over once between her fingers and thought, "Dear fiancé, let's see how you handle the new Stephanie." She leaned forward toward the driver. "Saks Fifth Avenue, please." An hour later, she stood in a dressing room with a black silk mini-dress against herself and felt something click. Not the careful, contained version. The other one. The one her father had never accounted for and Reuben hadn't met yet. Her father had his plan. Fine. But every plan assumed she'd stay manageable. If she made herself impossible to live with, the deal collapsed on its own, and she'd have beaten both of them without either realizing she'd been playing. She draped the dress over her arm and reached for the heels. Nobody got to treat her like property. Not her father. Not Leonardo Ruben Castiello. She was nobody's property. And she was going to make sure they both knew it. The car pulled up to the Castiello mansion, and Stephanie climbed out with bags on both arms. She pushed through the front door. Carolina was crossing the hallway and stopped mid-step, eyes dropping to the bags, then back up. The look of a woman doing math she didn't like. Stephanie walked past her without breaking stride. Reuben came out of his study at the sound of the door. His gaze went straight to her, then to the bags, then back, and his jaw tightened. "You didn't answer your phone. Your driver knew where I was." She kept moving toward the stairs, the bags rustling at her sides. "I figured that was enough." She was already 3 steps up when she turned, one hand on the rail, and looked back over her shoulder. "I won't make dinner. Shopping tired me out." Her eyes dropped briefly to the bags. "Though I think your card got its money's worth." She didn't wait for an answer. Carolina came to his side, voice low. "Leo, are you seriously planning a life with this girl?" Not a question. A verdict. "I'd take Heather, the platinum blonde from last year, remember her? I'd take Blair, and Blair has been in love with you for years." She shook her head. "Anyone would be more suitable than her." Reuben dropped his head. A smile pulled at his mouth. "She's counting on me to give up on her, Carolina." "Then give up." Carolina spread her hands. "Do it. Now." "No." He glanced up, still smiling. "She's mine. She knows it. She just needs time." He walked back into the study and closed the door behind him. Upstairs, Stephanie sat on the bed, surrounded by bags, and booked Maria the best suite she could find, paying with the black card before she could second-guess it. She lay back and thought about tomorrow. Maria arriving, the city, the two of them loose in New York while the card took the hit. Reuben was going to be furious. Then her fingers drifted, barely conscious of it, to the side of her throat. Her mouth. She recognized what she was doing and pulled her hand back. If he'd been anyone else, she thought, staring at the ceiling. If there had been no deal, no father, no contract forcing the shape of everything, just Reuben, the way she'd known him in Barcelona, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only problem worth having. Reuben, she could have wanted. Leonardo Castiello, she couldn't let herself. She wasn't sure anymore where one ended and the other began. The lobby of the Aman, New York, the most prestigious hotel in the city, had the kind of silence that cost real money to maintain. Maria walked in and stopped moving. Her eyes went up, then around, then back to Stephanie. "A whole week I'm staying here?" She turned to Stephanie. "This must have cost a fortune." "Reuben's generous." Stephanie kept walking. "Extremely." Maria caught up and grabbed her arm, pulling her to a stop before the front desk. "Stephanie, what exactly are you doing? I'm standing here, looking at all of this, and I genuinely cannot believe you're going through with a marriage." "Maybe I won't." Stephanie said it lightly, the way you'd say, "Maybe it'll rain." "What does that mean?" "It means my father has a plan, and Reuben has a plan, and neither of those plans accounts for me having one of my own." She smiled, not the polite version, the other one. "Between now and whatever happens next, I intend to make both of them very uncomfortable." Maria stared at her for a long moment. Then she exhaled. "You've really changed, girl." "I know." Stephanie picked up her bag. "Now check in. We're going out tonight. Dinner first, then after dark. The most popular nightclub in the city." 2 hours later they came back downstairs in heels. Maria had a look on her face that said she'd fully committed to wherever the night was going. Stephanie waved off the Castiello driver waiting at the curb without breaking stride and pulled up a cab instead. The driver didn't ask questions. Neither did she. Reuben's phone lit up 40 minutes into the meeting. He checked it, said nothing, and picked up. "Mr. Castiello." The driver kept his voice even. "Your fiancée was at the Aman with her friend. They left a few minutes ago. Taxi." Reuben set the phone down. Across the table, one of his men shifted forward. "We're also seeing movement from Antonio Rossi. He's been building alliances quietly. If he gets to the port operations first, we lose the revenue and 3 years of positioning in one move. Watch him." Reuben's voice didn't change. "Every contact, every conversation. Nothing happens until I give the word." He turned to the window. Manhattan sat out there the way it always did. Indifferent, enormous, unmoved by anything happening inside this room. 2 years at the head of this organization. 2 years without losing a single inch of ground to anyone. And right now he couldn't keep one woman from slipping out of his house with his card and a stranger's cab. Too much patience, he thought. Too many concessions. He reached for his jacket. It was time Stefani met Leonardo Castiello. After Dark lived up to its name. The bass moved through the floor and up through your shoes and into your chest, whether you wanted it to or not, and the lights were low enough that everyone looked like a better version of themselves. Stefani had her 3rd tequila in hand and wasn't thinking about the Castiello mansion or her father or wedding dates or any of it. Just the music, Maria beside her, the particular freedom of a body that had stopped being careful. Maria leaned in close enough to be heard. "I've known you 4 years. I'm your best friend, and I have never, not once, seen you like this." Her eyes flicked down to the black mini dress. "Girl, you look dangerous." Stephanie tipped the tequila back. The burn settled warm in her throat. "I've never felt like this either," she said, and meant it. Maria watched her for a second, then laughed, the real kind, startled out of her. But something shifted in her expression when a couple a few feet away pressed against each other like they'd forgotten they were in public. Her eyes moved around the room. "Reuben's going to lose his mind when he finds out. You didn't even tell him where we were going, and this place is—" She gestured vaguely at everything. "A lot?" "Reuben already knows where we are." Stephanie set her empty glass on a passing tray. "He probably knew before the cab reached the end of the block. Might even have eyes in here right now." She glanced at Maria. Nothing's going to happen to us. Relax. Maria looked only partially convinced, but she followed Stephanie onto the dance floor anyway, already moving before they even got there. The man appeared at the edge of Stephanie's vision first. Large, well-dressed, moving with the specific unhurried ease of someone who'd never had to push through a crowd in his life, because the crowd moved for him. His eyes were fixed on her, and they didn't look away when she noticed. He reached them and fell into the rhythm beside her without asking, which told her everything about how he operated. His hands found her waist. She stepped back and removed them. He smiled, leaned toward her ear. "I like you. How about we get to know each other?" "Not interested." She kept dancing, eyes forward. He didn't leave. A moment later, his mouth was at her ear again. "I've never seen you here before." Stephanie glanced at him over her shoulder. "Do you know everyone who comes here?" "I do, actually." There was something in his voice, not threat, just certainty. "I own this place. Someone like you, I would have noticed." His hands closed around her waist again, slower this time, drawing her toward him. She let it happen for exactly 1 second, reading the situation, deciding the cleanest exit, and then she pulled back and turned toward the bar. Thanks for the dance already forming on her lips. He didn't let go. His free hand came up and brushed along her hair, the backs of his fingers grazing her cheek. "Someone who has this much of my attention. I'm not ready to let her walk away just yet." Of course, Stephanie thought, keeping her face neutral. Of course this is what happens. Every variation of the same man, same assumption, that wanting her was sufficient reason to have her. She was tired of it in her bones. She didn't want a scene, didn't want the kind of night that ended with security and explanations, so she stayed measured. She raised her hand and covered his, about to guide it away from her face. "Stephanie!" Her name cut through the music like it had been fired from something. She turned. Reuben stood 3 feet away, and the expression on his face was not anger exactly. It was something past anger, something that had burned clean through it into a colder place. He looked at the man for exactly 1 second, long enough for the man to realize who he was looking at. Then he hit him, clean, hard, no hesitation. The man went down. People around them scattered back. The music kept playing. After Dark didn't stop for anything. But a circle of empty space opened up around them fast. Reuben turned to Stefani and took her wrist in his hand. Not rough, precise. "We're leaving." She didn't argue. She knew, somewhere in the back of her chest, that this had gone further than she'd planned. She'd wanted a reaction. She'd gotten one. But the man on the floor hadn't been part of her calculations, and the look in Reuben's eyes wasn't the controlled frustration she'd been provoking all week. This was different. This was something colder. "Maria!" she called over her shoulder as Reuben steered her through the crowd. Maria was already behind them. Outside, the city air hit cold. The car was already there. Reuben opened the door, and Maria climbed in. Stephanie was a step behind her when Reuben's hand closed around her wrist again and stopped her. His voice came out low, deliberate, each word placed carefully. "I know exactly what you were doing in there, but my patience has a limit, Stephanie." His eyes held hers without yielding. "There will be consequences." She looked up at him. The cool air, his grip on her wrist, the fact that she'd won. Technically, she'd won. She let the smile come. "Then make me pay." She got in the car. Reuben got in front next to the driver and didn't look back. The car pulled into traffic. Maria sat very still beside Stephanie and waited until they were half a block away before she leaned in and whispered, "You made him furious. Actually furious." Stephanie looked out the window at the lights sliding past. "Good," she murmured. But she pressed her lips together after she said it, because she could still feel where his hand had been on her wrist, and she knew, even if she'd never say it out loud, that she'd pushed past something tonight. Where that line was exactly, she wasn't sure anymore. The car stopped in front of the Aman Hotel. Stephanie stepped out, Maria beside her, Reuben a step behind. The lobby doors slid open, and the cool air hit them. Maria caught Stefani's arm just inside the entrance, her voice dropping low. "Don't push him any further. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I'm fine." Stefani touched her hand. "I'll call you tomorrow." She didn't get the chance to say anything else. Ruben's hand closed around her wrist, and he pulled her toward the elevator without a word. Maria followed, eyes tracking everything. "What are you doing?" Stephanie turned to look at him. Ruben's gaze moved over her, the black silk dress, the heels, her hair loose over her shoulders, and he swallowed once before his eyes came back up to her face. "I'm not taking you home like this. You're drunk. And that outfit—" He stopped himself. "We're staying here tonight." Maria's eyes widened, a slow smile tugging at her mouth. "Oh." Stephanie leaned back against the elevator wall. "If you booked separate rooms, fine." His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The doors opened on the floor. Ruben's hand closed around her wrist again, and he pulled her out into the hallway. Maria stayed in the elevator. Her voice carried through the narrowing gap. "I'm 1 floor up!" And then the doors shut. Ruben was already moving, pulling Stephanie down the hallway at a pace that didn't leave room for argument. The room was dark, except for the city through the window. Stephanie walked in first. She heard the door close and turned around. "You can't be in here?" She crossed her arms. Ruben stayed where he was, weight easy, not going anywhere. "I told you there would be consequences." Stefani lifted her chin, eyes steady on his. "Then name them." He closed the distance, not rushed, each step deliberate, giving her every chance to move. She didn't. Her back found the wall, and his hands came up on either side of her head, not touching her, just closing the world down to this narrow space between them. She could smell him, lemon and bergamot that she'd been trying to stop noticing for days. Her lungs adjusted to the proximity without her permission. "You... put that dress on." His fingers found the thin strap at her shoulder, the one that had slipped, and slid it back into place with a slowness that made her jaw tighten. "And you let another man touch you." "I don't belong to you." Her voice stayed flat. His head tilted. One finger came up, pointed directly at her face. Not a threat, just a correction. "That is exactly what you keep refusing to accept. You've been mine since Barcelona. You know it. You've known it every single day." Her chest was rising and falling faster than she wanted it to. She could feel her own pulse in her throat and hated that he could probably see it. And somewhere beneath the anger, beneath every wall she'd built around this, was a question she didn't want to answer. Why did the thing she hated most about him, that possessiveness, that absolute certainty that she was his, feel like the one thing she'd been waiting for someone to mean? "And you feel it too." His fingers rose slowly until they hovered just at her lips, not touching, barely a breath away. Her lips parted on their own. "You're making me lose my mind, Stephanie." Inside her head, two things were running at the same time, and neither would quiet down. "Don't give him this. Don't. He shouldn't get to own you." And underneath it, louder and far more honest, "Just kiss me. End this. I want to feel your breath, your hands. I want all of it." Then he gripped her hips and lifted her, and the sound that left her throat wasn't something she'd planned. Her back stayed against the wall, his mouth came down on hers, and it wasn't gentle and it didn't ask permission, and she kissed him back because her body had already made the decision without consulting her. His tongue moved against hers. His hands were on her thighs, her waist, moving like he was learning something by touch alone. She could feel exactly how much he wanted her. The hardness of him pressed against her, and it pulled at something deep and low, and made everything worse or better. She genuinely couldn't tell anymore. His mouth moved to her throat, then lower to her chest. Her head fell back against the wall. His name slipped from her in a breath that sounded almost like a moan. "Ruben." He went still. His breath came hard against her skin, then his forehead came down to rest against hers. Her forehead. And for a moment neither of them moved, both of them unsteady, the air between them. "Too tight." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Do you see what you do to me?" It wasn't a question. "And you want me. You know you do." Then slowly, deliberately, he set her down and took 2 steps back. "One more time." His voice came out rough but controlled. If this happens again, if you pull a stunt like tonight again, I will handcuff you to your bed, Stephanie. Do you understand me? She laughed, sharp, incredulous, the anger surfacing fast. Leonardo Castiello. The name came out like something she was spitting out. Ruben is just a mask. You want something, you take it. That's the only relationship you know how to have with a woman. His eyes narrowed. He tilted his head, studying her. Then he stepped back into her space and pressed his body against hers again, deliberate this time. His face was close enough that she felt the warmth of his breath on her mouth. I have always been exactly who I am with you. Each word placed carefully. But if you want to meet Leonardo... His mouth brushed close to her ear. Keep going. He stepped back and straightened his jacket. Stephanie stayed against the wall, her breath still unsteady, watching him. There's something you need to understand. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the edge. This marriage, the arrangement, the contract, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't change what's between us. What's between us is real. You know that. Stop running from it. He held her gaze for a moment longer. When I take that wedding dress off you, and I will, I want to hear you say that you want me, not just my body in a dark room. Me. Accept me with your mind, not just your body. That's when I'll make love to you, not before. He moved to the door. His voice came out rough, the edges of it frayed. A man holding something back by force of will alone. I'll see you in the morning. The door closed behind him. Stephanie stood in the middle of the room. She crossed to the sofa, picked up the pillow and hugged it against her chest. It wasn't just his body. It wasn't just desire. She'd told herself that for weeks. Clean, manageable, something she could control. But it wasn't true anymore. Maybe it had never been. It was the way he looked at her, the things he said, the particular way he carried himself, like a man who had decided long ago exactly who he was and hadn't reconsidered since. She was beginning to love all of it. Stephanie, she murmured into the dark. Have you actually fallen for him? She pressed her mouth into the pillow and screamed. The light came through the curtains sideways and landed directly on Stephanie's face. She blinked, disoriented. Ceiling, white walls, the low hum of the city far below. And then the previous night reassembled itself. The club. The man's hands on her waist, Ruben's fist, the hallway, the wall, his mouth. She pressed both palms over her face. She'd pushed him hard last night. Her head confirmed this with a dull throb, the tequila weighing in on every decision she'd made after 11. When she lowered her hands and turned, Ruben was asleep on the other side of the bed, on top of the covers, in just his boxers. He'd come in at some point during the night and lain down without waking her. She propped herself up on one elbow and watched him, his jaw slack, his chest rising and falling in the slow, unguarded rhythm of genuine sleep. She let herself look, at his shoulders, at the flat lines of his stomach, and felt something pull low inside her that she had no interest in examining. His hands on her, his mouth at her throat, the sound he'd make if... She bit down on her lower lip and stopped the thought there. You never used to think like this, Stephanie. She eased out of bed carefully, and that's when she saw it. On the nightstand, a glass of water and a sealed packet of Alka-Seltzer. She stood looking at it, and a smile pulled at her mouth before she could stop it. From the moment they'd met, Leonardo Ruben Castiello had done nothing but think about her. The card, the driver, after dark, and now this. A hangover remedy left in the dark without a word. Every single thing, except telling her who he actually was. That one thing aside. And it wasn't a small thing. He was getting deeper under her skin with every day that passed, and she had no idea what to do with that. She picked up the glass, drank, and slipped out of the room. Maria answered the door with her hair flattened on one side. Stefani climbed in beside her without explanation and pulled the covers up. Maria turned to look at her. You're in love with him, aren't you? Stephanie stared at the ceiling. You don't understand. Maria shifted to face her. Then make me understand. My father and everyone around him. That world is dangerous, and I mean it. Her throat tightened around the words, but her voice stayed even. Ruben is part of it. I watched what it did to my mother. I watched her disappear into it piece by piece until there was nothing left that was hers. I don't want that life. I don't want to raise a child inside it, always waiting for the call that changes everything." She exhaled. "All I want is a real job, and a life that belongs to me." Maria was quiet. Then she pulled Stephanie closer, rested her chin on top of her head, and stayed there. "Then you carry this for the rest of your life." Maria's voice dropped low. "You spend every year measuring every man against what you feel right now, asking yourself if it's the same, if anything could ever come close. A love you never lived becomes the only love you had. That's the cost, Stephanie. That's what safe actually costs." Stephanie covered her face with both hands. "I hate that I'm falling for him, Maria." Maria held on and left it there. When Ruben woke, the other side of the bed was empty. He registered it before he was fully awake, the coolness of the sheets, the faint indentation. He sat up, the nightstand, Alka-Seltzer packet torn open, glass drained. He looked at it for a moment, then smiled. Small, private, she was listening. Even mid-war, she was listening. His phone was already lit up with a message that killed the smile. He was up, showered and dressed fast, moving through the lobby with his jacket still settling when someone called his name from across the room. "Leonardo, what are you doing here?" Blair came toward him looking like she'd already had a full morning. Blowout, silk mini dress, the long-legged ease of someone who moved through rooms expecting them to rearrange around her. She was Carolina's closest friend, the only person outside the family who'd spent enough time in the house to call him by his first name. Everyone else defaulted to Mr. Castiello. Ruben stopped. "I could ask you the same thing." "Always." She crossed to him and her fingers went straight to his tie, adjusting it. "Business? Or the morning after something more interesting?" He lifted her hand away from his tie and released it. "I'm late, Blair." Her mouth curved. "Mr. Castiello, still so serious." She tilted her head, her expression going soft. "Carolina told me. The arrangement. I'm sorry. You deserve someone you actually chose." Her hand moved to his shoulder, fingers settling. Downstairs, Stephanie and Maria stepped out of the elevator and turned toward the breakfast room. Maria's elbow caught her ribs before they'd made it 10 feet. "Isn't that Ruben, by the entrance?" Stephanie looked up. He was still in the lobby, tall, put together, tie slightly crooked, and beside him, a woman, silk dress, legs, hair that had cost someone money this morning, one hand on his tie, then his hand moving to her shoulder and her fingers settling slowly over it. He said something. The woman's mouth curved. His hand stayed where it was, brief, conclusive, and then he walked out. Stephanie's gaze dropped to the floor. "It might not be what it looks like." Maria kept her voice low. "I told you." The words came out flat, each one placed carefully. "Every man in that world is exactly the same. They want everything. They take it." She walked into the breakfast room ahead of Maria, eyes forward, jaw set. She almost made it to the table before her eyes started to blur. Outside on the sidewalk, Blair was already talking, heels clicking hard against the concrete. "I waited an hour, Carolina." Her voice came out clipped, controlled, the kind of controlled that costs something. "He gave me the shoulder pat, the sister treatment." She pushed through the revolving door and into the street. "You told me he was miserable with this arrangement. He called it a love match." She stopped walking. "He must be in love with that Gambetta girl." The bridal boutique on Fifth Avenue was all cool air and cream-colored silk. Stephanie walked in ahead of Maria, but she couldn't shake the image. That woman's fingers on Ruben's tie, slow and familiar, his hand moving to her shoulder after, settling there like it belonged. Maria caught her wrist before she'd made it 3 steps. "You're seriously going to look at wedding dresses with that face?" Stephanie turned to the nearest rack and started going through it. "It probably won't even matter. I might not need to wear one." Her fingers moved over fabric without stopping. "Only 3 days left. I just need to show up with something. My father says he has a plan to cancel the whole thing." Maria stared at her. "He said what?" "That the wedding won't happen. that he has other plans. Stephanie kept moving down the rack. Whether he's actually going to pull it off or just telling me what I want to hear, I have no idea. He never thinks in straight lines. She pulled a dress from the rack and held it up. Then she flipped the tag. Maria leaned over, saw the number, and raised both eyebrows. She dropped her voice. "Honey, when this is over, if you hand that back to me second-hand, I can sell it and put a down payment on a studio apartment." Stephanie laughed, short and real. "I'd genuinely pay to see Ruben's face when he gets the bill." A few minutes later, she was in the fitting room mirror, and she didn't look like a woman who wanted to be there. Maria stood in the doorway, hands clasped at her chin. "Stefani, you look gorgeous." Her voice came out quieter than usual. "And that neckline, that is seriously bold." Stefani looked at herself. The dress fit her in a way that made everything harder to argue with. "I never thought I'd be standing here at 23. Maria came to stand beside her. "Whatever happens, find one moment in it that's actually yours. And when Ruben sees you in this," she tilted her head toward the mirror, "he is not going to recover." Then something in Maria's tone went flat and careful. "Stephanie, think about this with me." She kept her eyes on the mirror. "Your father struck a deal with the Castiellos. They're already setting up the mansion for a wedding. 3 days from now." She paused. "How exactly does that deal get cancelled? And Ruben, the way he's acted since Barcelona, the way he watches you, a man like that doesn't just sit back and let a wedding get called off." Maria let out a short laugh. "Not while he's breathing." Silence filled the small room. Stephanie turned the words over. "Not while he's breathing." Her eyes stayed on the mirror, the dress, the cut of it, the expression on her own face. Ruben had too much at stake. The deal, the businesses Tony put on the table, Tony working exclusively for the Castiellos. He wouldn't let her father walk away from any of it. The only way Tony Gambetta got out of this marriage was if Ruben wasn't in a position to stop him. Stephanie reached behind her for the zipper, fingers not quite steady. "We need to go, right now." Maria was already at the curtain. "I've been so focused on getting Ruben to back off," Stephanie worked the zipper down, "that I lost track of the actual problem." Maria went still. "What problem?" Stephanie looked at her in the mirror. "How far my father is actually willing to go." The garment bag was still in Stephanie's hand when she pushed through the boutique door and stopped. Ruben's car was at the curb, Ruben in the back seat, jacket on, watching her the way he always watched, like he'd already decided how this was going to go and was just waiting for her to catch up. She didn't move. "How did you know we were here?" The look he gave her was answer enough. "You're tracking my phone." She said it flat, not a question. "If I wasn't," he pushed the door open, "last night could have ended very differently." His eyes dropped to the garment bag. "You already bought one. I thought you'd want my mother there for that." Stephanie got in and set the bag between them like it was a wall. Maria slid in after her and immediately became very interested in the street outside her window. "I wanted it handled." Stephanie kept her voice even. 3 days left. Didn't need to turn it into an event. The car moved into traffic. Ruben watched her with the patience of someone who had nowhere better to be. "All this enthusiasm for the wedding. Why are you here, Ruben?" "I didn't see you this morning." The easy tone went out of his voice. "I'll be home late tonight. I wanted 30 minutes with you, that's all." She turned toward him. "I won't be there. I'm taking Maria to see the house I grew up in, and we're staying over." His brow pulled together, and she kept going before he could say anything. "It's my house. Don't rearrange your night on my account. Stay at the hotel. I'm sure someone would love the company." She paused. "Help straighten your tie, maybe." Something in his jaw tightened. "You saw me with Blair this morning." Stephanie kept her eyes on the window. "I don't want to talk about it." His phone rang and he picked it up. He listened, saying nothing, his gaze dropping to the middle distance. Then his voice came out flat and clipped. "The Rossis are moving. They wouldn't be this aggressive without something behind them. Nothing gets near the wedding. Close watch. Lock it down. He ended the call. Rossi. Stephanie shifted in her seat. Her father's voice came back to her, standing at the mansion, phone to his ear, back turned like that would be enough. Mr. Rossi said carefully, the way you say a name you don't want overheard. Who are the Rossis? She turned toward Reuben. He reached across and covered her hand where it sat on the seat, his thumb pressed once against her knuckles. Deliberate, quiet. Nothing you need to worry about. She looked down at his hand, left it there. Blair has been Carolina's closest friend since they were teenagers. She's in and out of the house. That's it. She turned back to the window. Outside, the city kept moving. His hand stayed over hers, warm and certain, and she didn't pull it away. And that, she thought, was its own kind of answer. The car stopped at the Gambetta gates. Both girls got out, and Reuben leaned toward the open door, one arm resting across the seat. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, like he was in no hurry at all, and also like he had already decided. One night, Stephanie. The car pulled away before she answered. Maria stopped in the doorway of Tony Gambetta's study and looked up. The ceiling was 14 feet at least. Dark wood paneling, a fireplace nobody had used in years, glass cases along one wall holding things that cost more than most people's apartments. She turned slowly, taking it all in. Stephanie, you grew up in this place and you never once mentioned it. She gestured at the room. You are the most understated person I've ever met in my life. Stephanie had already crossed to her father's desk. Only until I was 14. She pulled open the top drawer, scanned it, pushed it shut. Second drawer. Her hands moved fast and quiet. I need to find something. Anything that tells me what he's actually planning. Her eyes landed on the laptop. She looked at Maria. Do you think I can route whatever I pull off the microphone straight to my phone? She said it like she was asking about the weather. Background process, no icon, system-level access. Maria leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms. We're software engineers, sweetheart. We can do anything. Stephanie was already opening the laptop. She worked fast, terminal open, a script she'd built in her head on the ride over, adapted and running in under 10 minutes. The microphone would capture everything in the room and push the audio files directly to her phone over the home Wi-Fi. Automatic, silent. The process name buried inside a string of legitimate system services. Maria sat beside her, phone in hand, installing the receiving end. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. 40 minutes in, the door opened. One of the household staff, older woman, expression that gave away nothing. Her eyes moved from the laptop to Stefani to Maria and back to the laptop, and Stefani had already shifted the screen toward her before the woman took a second step. The neckline on this one, Maria said, finger on the screen, voice perfectly flat. I keep going back to it. Tell me honestly, is it better than the other one? Stephanie tilted the screen slightly and squinted at a wedding dress website she'd pulled up 30 seconds ago. The other one had more structure. This one is cleaner. She glanced up at the housekeeper. We're trying to make a final decision. It's driving me insane. The woman's gaze held for a moment. Can I bring you anything, Miss Gambetta? We're fine, thank you. The door closed. Neither of them moved for 3 full seconds. Then Stephanie exhaled. She's going to tell him I was in here. She is. Maria set her phone face down on the desk. But for her to tell your father anything useful about what we actually did, she'd need to know what she was looking at. And even if he checks the laptop himself, she picked up her phone again, he'd need to know exactly where to look and exactly what to look for. That's not a 5-minute job. Stephanie looked at her own phone. The app was running. A small indicator, steady green. She raised her hand. Maria slapped it. Whatever her father said in this room from now on, she'd hear it. She just had no idea yet how much she'd wish she hadn't. The evening light was going orange through the curtains when Maria dropped onto Stephanie's childhood bed and looked around at the room, the bookshelves, the old desk, everything exactly where it had been left. Okay, Maria pulled her knees to her chest. You scared me a little today. Are we actually safe in this house? Stephanie stood at the window, watching the grounds below. If you're asking whether my father will have us killed, no, Maria. I'm his daughter. He plans my life, he uses me, but he won't kill me. She turned, something dry in the smile. Probably. Maria threw a pillow at her. Both of them laughed. Then someone knocked. Once, and the door opened before either of them could answer. Tony Gambetta filled the frame the way he always did, like the space had been built around him. Suit pressed, posture effortless, expression set somewhere between warmth and appraisal. His eyes moved from Stephanie to Maria in the time it took to draw a breath. Stephanie? Surprise moved through his expression and was gone. I wasn't expecting you. His gaze settled on Maria. And you brought a friend. Maria straightened on the bed and managed a smile. Hello, Mr. Gambetta. He acknowledged it with the bare minimum. His attention went back to his daughter. Where's your fiancé? It's just one night. Stephanie kept her voice easy. Maria is one of my closest friends. She came for the wedding. I wanted to show her the house. Tony smiled the way he smiled at everyone, gracious, unreadable, final. Of course. He turned to leave, then paused with one hand on the doorframe. I have important guests coming this evening. We'll stay out of the way, Stephanie said. We'll be in the room all night. He nodded once and pulled the door shut behind him. Maria exhaled slowly, both hands pressed flat to the bedspread. Stephanie turned toward her, a slow smile working its way up. Maria. Whatever gets said in my father's study tonight, Stephanie held up her phone, the small green indicator still steady. We're going to hear every word. Maria stared at her for a long moment. I thought I was coming to a wedding. She fell back against the pillows. Turns out I'm in the middle of a mafia movie. The pizza had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Neither of them had noticed. Stephanie sat cross-legged on the bed, phone between them, volume all the way up. The audio came through in bursts, static footsteps, the low rumble of male voices bleeding into each other, none of it clean enough to follow until it suddenly was. How many do you think? Maria whispered. Stefani tilted her ear toward the phone. 3. Maybe 4. One voice separated from the rest. Quiet, deliberate, the kind of quiet that doesn't need volume behind it. Tony, no one can know we had anything to do with this. If it comes back to you, if you make a single mistake, I won't be there. Stefani's hand tightened around the phone. Her father's voice came back, carrying something she had never heard from him before, careful, almost deferential, stripped of the authority he wore everywhere else. Mr. Rossi, you have my word. The wedding will cover everything. The timing, the chaos, all of it. I put my daughter in the middle of this. What more do I need to do to prove myself to you? Maria reached over and gripped Stephanie's arm. Stephanie didn't move. Mr. Rossi took his time. Through the static came the sound of someone shifting in a chair, a glass being set down, and then, getting rid of Leonardo Castiello is a significant opportunity for us. Once it's done, every connection he had, every operation, it all transfers to you, and the debt you owe me disappears with him. Tony's voice came back smooth, easy, back on familiar ground. You're a generous man, Mr. Rossi. I'm a practical one. The pause stretched. I'm also taking steps to make sure your daughter isn't caught in the crossfire. His tone didn't shift at all. She's a lovely girl, Tony. When all of this is behind us, I'd like to meet her. Who knows? Maybe our families have more to offer each other. Tony Gambetta laughed. Warm, full, the laugh of a man accepting a compliment. That would be an honor, Mr. Rossi. Stephanie pressed her fingers to her mouth. Maria let go of her arm and sat back very still. The voices moved on. Logistics, timing, names that meant nothing to her. Stephanie kept the phone in her hand but stopped processing the words. At some point she set it face down on the bed. The room held the silence. What are you going to do? Maria asked, her voice low. Stephanie looked at the window. Outside the grounds had gone dark, the city lights a faint smear above the tree line. My father's plan to get me out. She said it the way you say something you're still making real by saying it. Strike a deal with the Rossis, take out the Castiellos at the wedding, hand me over after. She exhaled. Father of the Year, really strong contender. Maria pressed her lips together. I'm so sorry, Stephanie. She reached out and covered her hand, held it. Stephanie kept her eyes on the dark outside the glass. I need a plan, Maria. One that gets me out, and keeps Reuben alive long enough to be angry at me. She pressed her palm flat against the window pane. Because right now, he has no idea what's coming. The Gambetta house was different at 2 a.m, quieter than it had any right to be, all that square footage pressing down in the dark. Stephanie moved through it barefoot in her nightgown, the cold of the marble floor coming up through her feet. She'd lain awake for 2 hours running the same calculations, and at some point the stillness became more unbearable than whatever was waiting in her father's study. She sat down at her father's desk, opened the laptop, and got to work. It took her 2 hours to get through the network security, layered, competent, built by people who assumed the threat would come from outside. She found the financial records, the company accounts, transaction logs going back 3 years, wire transfers routed through 4 different entities. Everything her father had been careful to keep separate, she pulled into a single folder. Then she opened an anonymous email account and sent the folder to herself. She closed everything out, cleared the session, and sat for a moment in the dark with her hands in her lap. Dawn was starting to show at the edges of the curtains when she went back upstairs. By 7 she had Mariah on her feet, which took more effort than breaking into a corporate network. Is your laptop with you? Stephanie was already pulling on her jacket. Maria, eyes half open, pointed at her bag on the floor. Do you think I go anywhere without it? Good. Meet me at Central Park in 2 hours, the east entrance. Stephanie shouldered her own bag. When my father's IT security figures out someone got into the system, he'll call me. I need to be somewhere he can't reach me easily, or at least somewhere he has to think twice about making a scene. Maria looked at her for a long moment, then pulled the laptop out of the bag without another word. The Castiello mansion was quiet at 8. A housekeeper let her in with a nod, and Stefani moved fast. Upstairs, her room, laptop and charger into the backpack, done in under 4 minutes. She was coming back down through the garden when she saw Lucia. Reuben's mother sat at the small iron table near the rose beds, coffee cup in both hands, dressed like she'd been awake for hours. Mornings were something she occupied rather than endured. She looked up when Stephanie came down the path and smiled. Good morning, Stephanie. Her voice was easy, warm. You're up early? She nodded at the chair across from her. I haven't seen much of you these past 2 days. Come sit with me. Stephanie hesitated, backpack on her shoulder. She had 2 hours and a list of things that couldn't wait. But Lucia was watching her with an ease that didn't demand anything, and her face, open, steady, the kind of warmth that didn't perform itself, caught Stephanie off guard. Her mother used to look at her that way. She sat down. Lucia looked out at the garden. Women like us live in houses that look impressive from the outside. Big rooms, nice cars, everything money can actually buy. She turned the cup in her hands. But the people we love are always in some kind of danger. Money doesn't touch that part. Stephanie kept her eyes on the roses and rubbed her hands together in her lap. My husband was a hard man. I knew what he was before I married him. Lucia's voice carried no apology in it, just fact. I raised Leonardo to have something his father didn't, a conscience, some sense of what's actually wrong. She set the cup down. The face he shows the world as a Castiello, that's Leonardo. That's his father's son. She looked at Stephanie. But Reuben, the man trying to make the business legitimate, trying to do right without losing himself in the process, that one's mine. He's not his father. I need you to know that. Why are you telling me this? Lucia's expression didn't change. Because you're young and you're smart, and your father offered you as a bargaining chip, which is ugly no matter how you dress it up. She picked up her cup again. And because, whatever you're planning, I can see that you're planning something. I'm asking you not to let it cost my son. Stephanie held her gaze for a moment, then looked away across the garden. She nodded once, got up, and walked out through the gate. On the sidewalk, She flagged a cab. Lucia's words were still with her, not replacing anything she'd already decided, just sitting alongside it, adding weight. She got in and told the driver Central Park, East Side. She had work to do. Stephanie and Maria sat side by side on a park bench near the east path, laptops open, bags wedged between them. Around them the park moved at its usual pace. Joggers, dog walkers, a couple arguing quietly over a stroller, none of it touching what was happening on their screens. Maria scrolled through a directory and let out a slow breath. There are thousands of files here. How are we supposed to find anything useful? Keywords. Stephanie was already in the search bar. Rossi, Castiello, debt, port. We work through what comes up and see what connects. 5 hours later, they had it. Not everything, but enough. Wire transfers that didn't match any declared business activity. Correspondence referencing the port operations by name alongside Rossi's. A debt figure that appeared in 3 separate documents, none of them official. Enough for a federal prosecutor to pull the thread and find the rest herself. Maria leaned over to look at Stephanie's screen. What about the Castiello files? Stephanie's finger moved to the delete key, and she pressed it without hesitating. The folder disappeared. Ruben stays out of this. Maria watched her. He could be implicated anyway, even if he stays out of this. Stephanie's voice was quiet, but she didn't repeat it a third time. She closed the window and opened the anonymous mail client she'd been running through a proxy. Maria reached over and took her hand, held it. You love him. Stephanie kept her eyes on the screen. Loving someone isn't always enough to build a life on. She pulled her hand back gently and typed in the federal prosecutor's office email address. The attachment was already queued. She looked at it for a moment, all of it sitting there, everything her father had built and hidden and leveraged against her. Then hit send. The screen returned to blank. What now? Maria's voice came out careful. Stephanie closed the laptop. Outside, a cloud moved across the sun and the light on the path shifted. The wedding is tomorrow. I need somewhere to stay tonight that nobody knows about. She picked up her bag. Somewhere I can think. A couple was standing near the tree line, kissing, oblivious to everything around them. Her chest tightened. She looked away. Where do you even go, she thought, when the safest place you knew is the one thing you can't go back to? Stephanie's phone was already in her hand when it lit up again. She looked at the screen. 10 missed calls from Ruben, all within the last 5 hours. The timestamp steady even, the kind of patience that runs out. Maria pulled her bag onto her shoulder and watched her. We both know what happens when he can't find you. Stephanie called him back. He picked up before the second ring. Stephanie, why haven't you been answering? What are you doing in Central Park? I'm heading home. She kept her voice even. The Castiello mansion. Please come home. She ended the call. Maria was looking at her with the expression she made when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was thinking. You said you needed somewhere nobody knows about. My father can't touch me while I'm under Ruben's roof. He won't risk it. Stephanie shouldered her bag. There's nowhere safer right now. Maria looked at her, eyes wide. You're not going to hide? The safest place I can be right now is next to Ruben. My father can't touch me there. Stephanie leaned in and kissed her cheek, held it for a second, then she stepped back. What's going to happen tomorrow? Maria's voice came out smaller than usual. What about the wedding? I did everything I could. Stephanie picked up her bag. Now I need to talk to Ruben. She turned and walked toward the street. The mansion was quiet when she got back. The housekeeper showed no reaction, just nodded and disappeared. Stephanie went upstairs. In her room, she opened the wardrobe and stood there for a moment. Then she reached in and pulled out a white dress, simple, cotton, and laid it on the bed. After her shower, she sat on the edge of the bed in it, wet hair over one shoulder, listening to the house. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. In here, nothing moved. She'd spent years watching other people's families from the outside, boarding school at 14. The weekends she stayed behind while her dorm emptied out around her, eating a sandwich alone in a room that smelled like everyone else's laundry. Her mother's Sunday calls, her mother's voice, thinning each year, hollowed out by a life she hadn't chosen either. University. She'd been invited to a classmate's family dinner once, a house in the suburbs outside Zurich, and the father had opened the door and grabbed his daughter by the arms and hauled her in like she was something worth keeping. Stephanie had stood on the doorstep for a fraction of a second before smiling and walking inside. She'd thought about that doorway for weeks afterward. She'd never had a word for what she'd been missing. That was what it was. Just the basic animal certainty that someone was holding the door open for you, that there was a place you fit into without having to explain yourself, without performing your right to be there. She'd felt it once. One time, Reuben's arms around her in the dark, his breathing steadying under her ear, and the whole complicated wreckage of the last few weeks falling quiet for a few hours. Tomorrow, she'd leave. She'd already decided. But tonight, she was here. Stephanie heard footsteps on the stairs. Reuben opened the door, face tight, angry, but something underneath the anger that looked closer to worry. He shrugged his jacket off and threw it at the chair, already rolling his sleeves as he turned toward her. "Stephanie." His voice had an edge to it. 10 calls. I've been trying to reach you all day." He moved further into the room, eyes fixed on her. "You disappear again. You won't answer. You're in Central Park." His eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you doing? What are you hiding?" She stood up from the bed. He was still waiting for her to fire back. When she didn't, when she just looked at him, still, her hands loose at her sides, his jaw shifted. He read her face the way he read rooms, quickly, then again, slower. "What happened to you?" The anger had gone out of his voice. What replaced it was quieter and harder to look at. His name in her mouth came out quieter than she'd intended. "Reuben." He crossed the room in a few steps and took her by the shoulders, his hands firm but careful. This close she could smell his cologne, lemon, bergamot, sea salt. "Tell me what's wrong, Stefani." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to talk. I need to belong somewhere tonight. That's all I know." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her in and held her, one hand at the back of her head, pressing her face to his chest. She felt the tension in him, the day still wound tight in his back, and she leaned into it rather than away. Her fingers found the buttons of his shirt. His voice dropped, low and questioning. "Stephanie?" She pressed her lips to the skin at his collar and felt his whole body go still. He pulled back just far enough to look at her, and she reached up and kissed him before either of them could think past it. He kissed her back hard, his hands sliding into her hair, catching her face between them. She stepped back. Her fingers slipped the straps from her shoulders. The dress fell to the floor. Reuben didn't move. His eyes stayed on her face first, searching, slower than she expected, before they lowered, taking her in piece by piece. Something in his expression shifted. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "What are you doing, Stephanie?" She pressed herself against him and wrapped her arms around his neck, her face turning into the warmth of his throat. "I need you tonight." Her voice came out unsteady. "I need to belong to you. Please." He held her for a moment. Then he picked her up and laid her down on the bed, lowering himself beside her. He pulled his shirt off and let it drop. His mouth found her neck, moved lower. Heat moved through every place his lips touched, her collarbone, the curve of her chest, and her body arched into him. Each touch burned her skin and soothed it at the same time, the way pressure on a bruise can. Every kiss eased something she hadn't known was coiled that tight. The sounds that left her lips were low and unguarded. She'd held herself quiet her whole life, and tonight she let it all go. He lifted his eyes to hers, moss green, steady, dark with something that hadn't been there before. He kissed her, and against her lips he whispered, "I told you I'd have you when I took the wedding dress off. The first time should mean something, Stephanie. Tell me, why now?" She lifted her eyes to his. "With you," her voice trembled, "I feel something I've never felt with anyone else." She swallowed, searching for the words. "Like I'm exactly where I belong." His gaze held hers. "Stephanie." His voice dropped. I need to know what you feel for me." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. He pulled her closer, his hand sliding into her hair. His cheek brushed slowly against hers, his mouth close to her ear. "Say it." Her breath caught. She turned her head, her lips near his ear. The words came out in a trembling whisper. I love you. There's no moment that could mean more than this." Her hand pressed flat against his chest, his heartbeat pushing back against her palm. "Right now. I want to feel you, Reuben." His eyes darkened. "I love you, Stephanie." His voice was rough, the words stripped of anything but truth. "From the moment I saw your photo, something in me knew we belonged to each other. But when I touched you on that boat, when I sat across from you at dinner and listened to you, when we fell asleep in that bed together." He paused, his hand moving slowly along her cheek. "That's when I knew I wanted to spend my life with you." She pulled him down and kissed him, hard, hungry, her fingers curling into his hair. Against his mouth she whispered, "Just take me." When the last of everything between them fell away, her fingers and his locked together. When he filled her, their sounds merged, breath and voice and skin, and she felt herself come apart completely, without apology, without holding anything back. Afterward, a single tear ran down her cheek. She couldn't say if it was from happiness or grief. Maybe it was both. Maybe there was no word for the exact place between the two. She pressed her face against his chest and felt his heartbeat slow under her cheek, and she thought, "This is the only place I have ever felt like I belong." She was leaving tomorrow. She closed her eyes and let herself stay. Reuben's arm was around her waist, his mouth moving slow and warm against the back of her neck. His other hand rested flat on her stomach, fingers barely moving. The room was dark and still, the city a low murmur behind the curtains. Stephanie bit down on her lower lip. She needed to get up. She knew that the way you know something that doesn't help at all, clearly, uselessly. If she lay here much longer, if she let herself sink any further into the warmth of his body curved around hers, she was never going to be able to walk out of this room. Not tomorrow, not ever. Reuben pulled her in closer. His arm tightened across her stomach, and his lips stilled against her neck. "Don't run," he said quietly. "Don't leave me. I don't want to be without you." He meant it for tonight. She knew that. He meant the next few hours, the sheets, the dark. But her eyes filled anyway, because tomorrow she was going to do exactly what he was asking her not to do. She was going to leave, and she was going to let him wake up to the empty space she left behind. His hand moved slowly along her arm. His voice was low, careful. "Aren't you going to tell me what happened?" She opened her mouth, and from somewhere below them, the front door hit the wall. "Stephanie!" Tony Gambetta's voice came up through the floor, through the walls, raw and furious in a way she hadn't heard from him in years. "I know you're in there. Get down here, now." Reuben sat up. He was already reaching for his shirt before she could say anything. She watched him button it with the efficient calm of someone who'd learned a long time ago not to let an unexpected situation show on his face. "Get dressed," he said, his voice quiet. She pulled the white dress back on, fingers moving on instinct. Reuben crossed to the door, then stopped and turned back. He held out his hand. "Whatever's between you two." "He can't touch you in this house, Stephanie." His eyes held hers, steady. "You understand that?" She took his hand and nodded once. They went downstairs together. Tony was standing in the entrance hall without his tie. First time she'd ever seen him without one. His collar open, his face stripped of the careful composure he wore like armor. The rage in his eyes was old and uncontrolled, the kind that lives below the surface for years and comes up ugly. Reuben let go of her hand and stepped forward. "Tony, what's going on?" Tony didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on Stephanie. "What did you do?" His voice dropped low, which was worse than the shouting. "Tell me you didn't go digging through files that weren't yours. Tell me you didn't pull that data." Reuben turned to look at her, his expression shifting, not accusatory, but reading her, trying to piece together something that was assembling itself too fast. Stephanie straightened. Her chin came up. You did it to me first. I protected myself. The words landed in the room like something physical. Tony stared at her, and for one moment there was nothing on his face but the shock of a man who had never once considered that she would. Then his eyes narrowed. He raised one finger at her, pointing, his hand not quite steady. You don't understand this world. You never did. You're going to get us all killed. Stephanie held his gaze. You should have thought about that before you sat down with the Rossis. The silence that followed was total. Reuben went very still. She could feel it without looking at him. The shift in the room, the way his attention sharpened to a point. He was watching Tony now with eyes that had stopped being patient. Tony moved toward her, fast and purposeful. You're coming with me right now. Reuben stepped in front of him, one hand flat against Tony's chest, calm, immovable, enough to stop him cold. Nobody walks my wife out of my house. His voice was even. Not for any reason. Not even you. Tony's jaw tightened. She's not your wife yet. You have no claim over her. Reuben glanced once toward the two men stationed near the door. They moved without a word, positioning themselves on either side of Tony. Tony looked at them, then back at Reuben, and something in his expression shifted. Recalculating. Whatever you were planning, Reuben said, it clearly wasn't built with either of our interests in mind. You're going to show up tomorrow, and you're going to behave yourself. After the wedding. His voice didn't change, didn't harden, which somehow made it worse. We'll handle this. Just the two of us. Tony laughed, short and sharp, the sound of a man with fewer options than he'd arrived with. He turned and looked at Stephanie. Those files aren't going anywhere. You understand me? Stupid girl. He shook his head slowly. If you sink me, every debt I carry lands on you. All of it. Think about that. Stephanie looked at her father. The open collar, the unsteady hand, the eyes that had never once in her life looked at her and simply seen her, and felt the anger she'd carried for years go quiet inside her, replaced by something colder and much more final. She laughed, and even she heard how little warmth was in it. As long as I'm away from you, she said, I don't care. Tony stared at her for a long moment. Then Reuben's men walked him to the door. The entrance hall went quiet. Reuben stood with his back to her, hands loose at his sides, looking at the closed door. He turned around, his face unreadable, the particular blankness he wore when something was happening behind it that he hadn't decided to name yet. Stephanie, he said, keeping his voice even, what did you take from your father, and what did you do with it? Lucia and Carolina were still in the hallway, watching. Reuben didn't acknowledge either of them. He took Stefani by the wrist and walked her to the study, closed the door behind them. Tell me what's going on. Stefani looked at him. I heard my father made a deal with the Rossis. Reuben's brow drew together. He didn't speak, waited for her to keep going. She took a breath. I think they're planning something at the wedding. They believe you're in the way, your business, your operations, and after... She steadied herself. My father is planning to hand me over to Rossi. He told Rossi it would be an honor. Reuben pulled her into him without a word. She felt the tension in his frame, the way he held her, firm, like something he intended to keep. Then he stepped back, his hands on her arms, his eyes on her face. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why are you out there trying to handle this on your own? I just found out. I'm telling you now. She held his gaze. And I did something else. I broke through my father's network security and pulled every file I could get to. He went quiet. What did you do with them? She swallowed. I uploaded everything to a server nobody can find. It's insurance. Reuben let go of her arms and turned toward the desk, one hand resting on the edge of it. He stayed like that for a moment, working through it. When he turned back, his voice was even. Your father is right about one thing. The Rossis don't play games. Once they know you touched those files, they won't let it go. His eyes stayed on hers. You should have come to me first, Stephanie. Don't you trust me? I trust you. She said it without pausing. But I don't want this life. I've never wanted it. Can you hear me when I say that? He crossed to her, put 2 fingers under her chin, and tilted her face up. His eyes were dark green, steady. After what you just did, marrying you is no longer about the arrangement. The Rossis know your name now. They know what you touched. His thumb moved along her jaw. Keeping you safe. That's on me now. And I will. She searched his face. There was no performance in it, just the flat, certain weight of a man who meant exactly what he said. He pulled her in and kissed her. She kissed him back, her hands against his chest, and over his shoulder her eyes stayed open for a moment. She closed them. Was she doing the right thing? The Castiello mansion garden was already in motion by noon, staff moving in clean lines across the lawn, white chairs in precise rows, flowers on every surface, caterers setting up cocktail stations along the stone path. The whole place had the tightly wound energy of something that was going to happen whether anyone was ready or not. Stephanie stood at the window in her towel, hair still damp, watching them work. She'd been standing there longer than she should have. Behind her, Maria was on the bed watching her with the quiet worry she never bothered to hide. Lucia knocked and came in without waiting for an answer, already dressed, a small velvet box in her hands, and a smile on her face. The ceremony is in 2 hours, and you haven't started getting ready. She said it without reproach, crossed to Stephanie, and held the box out. These were my mother's. I want you to wear them today. Stephanie opened the box. Pearls, simple and old. Thank you. Lucia's hand rested briefly on her arm. I just want you both to be happy, and to take care of each other. She held Stephanie's gaze for a moment, then turned and walked out, pulling the door softly behind her. Maria raised her eyebrows. She would have been a good mother-in-law. Not everyone gets that lucky. Stephanie set the box on the dresser and reached for the wedding dress. When she turned, Maria moved behind her without a word, fastened the back, then lifted the pearls and clasped them at her neck. In the mirror, Maria caught her eye. Try to smile. Are we at a wedding or a funeral? Stephanie forced a smile. Maria looked at it for a second and shook her head. Most beautiful, hopeless bride I have ever seen in my life. That came out real. A short laugh. Genuine. Gone almost as fast as it came. Stephanie turned back to the glass. What time does the flight leave? 7 tonight. Maria's eyes held hers in the reflection. You're getting yourself out. That's what this is. A moment, then quieter. Think he'll let you go? Stephanie looked at her own face. The dress, the pearls, the expression she couldn't quite flatten, no matter how long she stood there. He won't have a say. The garden filled quickly. Stephanie stood at the window and watched her father move through the guests below, composed, working the room, giving nothing away. 6 men she didn't recognize were stationed along the perimeter, positioned too deliberately to be accidental. Maria appeared at her shoulder. They're going to X-ray people at the gate. When the knock came, Stephanie shook her head at Maria. The door opened a few inches. Reuben was in the hall already dressed, dark suit, his eyes moving past Maria the instant the door moved and finding Stephanie across the room. Everything okay? Even, controlled. Bad luck to see the bride, Mr. Castiello. Maria held her ground. His eyes stayed on Stephanie, not the question he'd asked. The other one. Maria glanced back. Stephanie gave a small nod, and the door eased shut. Stephanie turned back to the window. The dress, the pearls, the eyes she wasn't going to examine right now. Lucia knocked at 20 to 2. It's time. Tony was waiting at the garden doors, collar straight, expression reset. A man who'd decided the day was still salvageable. His gaze landed on Stephanie and sharpened. I'm not walking out with you. His mouth opened. Lucia stepped to his side and took his arm before he could get a word out. Mr. Gambetta, you'll escort me. Warm, absolute, no room for argument. Over her shoulder, one quick glance at Stephanie, and then the smallest possible wink. The chairs were full, string music near the altar, 200 faces turning as the doors opened. Stephanie walked the path with Maria, her eyes on the stone under her feet. One step, and then the next, the specific feel of it through the thin soles of her shoes. Her breathing was measured, controlled, the way she'd learned to keep it since she was 14 years old, and her mother put her on a plane to Zurich and said, "You'll be safe there." At the altar, Reuben was already standing. He turned when she came through the doors, found her across the full length of the garden before she'd taken 3 steps, and the corner of his mouth moved. Barely, just for a second. The man who controlled every room he walked into, standing at his own altar, trying not to smile. Stephanie kept walking. She didn't let herself look away. She was marrying the man she loved, and somewhere behind the string music and the white chairs and the 200 people watching, a clock was already running out. The sirens came before the officiant said a single word. 2 SUVs rolled through the front gate hard and fast, doors already opening before the vehicles stopped. Men in dark vests fanned out across the garden from 3 directions at once, not running, not shouting, just moving with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing exactly where everyone is standing. Guests lurched to their feet, chairs scraped stone, flowers knocked sideways, someone near the back knocked their chair clean over. Tony saw them coming. He turned. And they were already on him, 2 agents, efficient and practiced, handcuffs on before he'd gotten all the way around. Across the garden, Rossi had 3 of them closing in from different angles and was already talking, voice pitched high, climbing fast towards something that wasn't going to help him. Then a 3rd agent broke from the group and walked straight to the altar. "Leonardo Ruben Castiello, you're being detained for questioning in connection with a federal investigation. You'll need to come with us." Ruben went still. Then he turned and looked at Stephanie. She hadn't planned what her face would do. She'd run through this moment 100 times, and none of it had prepared her for standing in front of him when it actually happened. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "I'm sorry." Her voice came out steady. She had no idea how. "I love you, Ruben." He looked at her for a long moment, reading her face the way he always did, quickly at first and then slower. Then came one slow nod. Not forgiveness, not accusation. Something harder and quieter than either. The nod of a man who understood exactly what she'd done and wasn't going to pretend otherwise in front of 200 people. The agent touched his arm. Ruben walked with them. Lucia moved to her son immediately, her hand at his back, her chin level and her spine straight. Tony's voice cut across the garden from somewhere near the driveway, and then a car door closed and took it away. Rossi's carried a few seconds longer before another did the same. Maria's hand closed around Stephanie's arm. "We have to go right now." Stephanie looked once more at the place where Ruben had been standing. The altar, the flowers, the chair she never sat down in. Then she took the hem of her dress in her free hand and walked. They were in a cab 2 minutes later, Stephanie still in the wedding gown, Maria's bag on the seat between them. The city moved past the window like it had no idea what had just happened. "Why did they take Ruben?" Maria's voice was careful. "You said you deleted the Castiello files." "Almost all of them." Stephanie didn't turn from the window. "I left one. Enough to bring him in for questioning. Not enough to charge him." Maria sat with that. Then, "You didn't want to have to look at him when you left." Stephanie's shoulder moved. "I don't know if I could have." The terminal was loud and bright and full of people who had somewhere to be. Stephanie did not look like any of them. The wedding dress drew eyes the way an accident does, that involuntary flicker of disbelief, then the quick look away. She kept her chin up and her pace even. Maria walked just behind her shoulder. "You can change on the plane. We're boarding in 20 minutes. Stephanie nodded without answering. She was watching the departures board, the Barcelona gate, the steady movement of the line ahead of them. Around her, the terminal hummed along, announcements overhead, a child crying somewhere near the coffee stand, 2 men in suits arguing over a phone. The line moved forward. 10 people ahead of them, then 8, then 6. Maria pulled the tickets from her bag and held them ready. Stephanie stared at the shoulders of the man in front of her, at the slow crawl of the line toward the gate. "Maria." Her voice came out lower than she intended. "Yes." Maria didn't look up from the tickets. Stephanie let out a slow breath. "I'm an idiot." Maria glanced at her sideways. "Now is not the time. Where exactly am I running to?" It wasn't a question. They'll find me anywhere. Barcelona, Zurich, wherever. I have been terrified my entire life, and I will keep being terrified, and the only difference is whether I'm terrified alone or not. 4 people. The gate agent was scanning boarding passes. My mother was the only warmth I had for a long time. Her hand pressed flat against her side, steadying itself. And then she was gone, and I didn't know what to do with myself, so I just kept going. That's all I've been doing. Moving. Never stopping long enough to want anything. She looked at the gate ahead. And then I found somewhere that felt like home, and I ran from it. Because running is all I know. Maria held the tickets at her side. Her eyes stayed on Stephanie's face. He has to hate me. The words came out before she'd finished thinking them. After everything. He has to. Maria tilted her head. He doesn't look like a man who gives up easily, sweetheart. Stephanie stood there. The line moved again. 2 people between her and the gate. She took 2 steps back. Maria watched her without moving. I love you. She looked at her. I'm sorry. I know. Maria smiled, and it was a real one, tired and warm and completely unsurprised. Go. Stephanie turned. The wedding dress moved with her, and she didn't slow down for the stairs, didn't stop to explain herself to anyone, didn't let herself think about what came next or what it would cost. The terminal opened ahead of her, long and bright and full of strangers, and she ran. The cab pulled away before Stephanie had taken 3 steps. She stood at the edge of the driveway and looked at the mansion. At the garden still laid out the way it had been this morning, white chairs in rows, most of them empty now, a few blown sideways by the wind that had picked up since the afternoon. A centerpiece had toppled off one of the tables. Flower petals scattered across the stone path. The whole place looked like something had torn through it and left without finishing the job, which it had. She'd been the one who called it in. Her heels were unsteady on the gravel, the hem of the dress catching at her ankles. She walked toward the front door anyway. Reuben might still be in a federal building somewhere. That thought had been with her since she'd told the driver to turn around. 1 file. She'd left 1 file, just enough to get him pulled in, not enough to hold him. She'd calculated it in Central Park with her hands on the keyboard and told herself it was the clean way out. She raised her fist and knocked before she could think her way back out of it. Lucia opened the door. Her face was soft, tired, carrying something that looked like grief. She looked at Stephanie standing there in the wedding dress. We thought you'd gone. I'm sorry. The words cracked on the way out. Lucia pulled her in without another word, and Stephanie let herself be held, her face going to Lucia's shoulder, and then she was crying in a way she hadn't in years. Not the kind she could manage, not the kind she could keep quiet. Lucia's hand moved through her hair. All you ever wanted was to feel safe. Her voice was quiet, close to Stephanie's ear. You think I didn't know that? From the hallway behind her, Carolina's voice came dry and flat off the wall. The runaway bride returns. Stephanie pulled back and looked. Carolina was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, watching, not cruel, just very much herself. She tilted her head toward the study at the end of the hall. His lawyers got him out 20 minutes ago, not enough to charge him. Her eyes stayed on Stephanie's face. He's been in there since. Stephanie wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. She looked at the study door. Dark wood, closed, a thin line of light at the bottom. She walked to it, fingers closing around the handle, standing there for a few seconds with her pulse loud in her ears. Then she opened the door. Reuben was at his desk with a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking, just holding it, his gaze on some fixed point past the window. When the door came open, he turned. His jaw tightened. He set the glass down, rose from the chair, and crossed the room toward her. Steady, deliberate. Stephanie stepped inside and pushed the door shut at her back. I'm sorry. The words came before he reached her. Running was the only thing I knew how to do. I acted like a coward. Her voice held. I'm done. Running. He stopped in front of her, his fingers finding her face, tracing her jaw, her cheek slow. But you came back to me. She looked up at him. You didn't send anyone after me this time. If you were going to be happier without me, his thumb moved along her cheekbone. Letting you go was the right thing to do. Stephanie shook her head, her fingers closing around his wrist. I won't be happier without you. He leaned in slowly, his forehead dropping to hers first. A breath, just that. And then his mouth found hers, deep and certain, his hands framing her face like she might disappear again if he let go. Then he stepped back. In one motion he went down to one knee, his hand moving to his inside pocket and coming back with the ring. Stephanie Gambetta. He kept his eyes on hers. Will you spend your life with me? Inside this world you've always run from. I'll keep you safe. I'll make sure you feel it, every single day. This house, or wherever else you want. I want it to feel like yours. Your work, your choices, your path. I won't put you or our family in danger. Not for anything. Stephanie lowered herself to the floor in front of him, the wedding dress pooling around her on the rug, her hand trembling when she held it out. Reuben took it. He pressed his mouth to her knuckles, just for a moment, then slid the ring onto her finger. She kissed him before she could find any words, her hands in his hair, his arms lifting her off the floor and pulling her in. Everything that had happened between this morning and right now collapsing into the single fact of him. When he finally pulled back, they were both standing. He was still holding her face, his mouth moved to her ear. I told you this moment would come. Low, just for her. When I'd take that dress off you. He reached back without looking. The lock clicked into place. The city was doing that particular January thing. Clear sky, cold that bites clean, the kind of morning that makes New York look scrubbed and new, like someone came through overnight and reset everything. Stephanie walked 2 blocks south from the building with Bruno pulling at the leash, lunging at every pigeon with the conviction of a dog who has never once caught anything. Mr. Jones was outside his shop, pulling the awning down, just like every morning. He looked up when he heard Bruno's nails on the sidewalk. "Morning, Mrs. Castiello?" He bent down and gave the dog a scratch behind the ears. "Cold one today?" "It is," she smiled. "Morning, Mr. Jones." He smiled, and she walked on. The dry cleaner nodded through the glass. Bruno lunged at a pretzel on the sidewalk, and she pulled him back. Just another morning. She used to not have those. She pushed through the building door, took the elevator up, turned her key in the lock. Butter and eggs. She smelled it before she made it through the entryway, and when she came around into the kitchen, Reuben was at the stove with a towel knotted at his waist and not much else, hair still damp, shoulders easy, the pan going quietly on the front burner. Bruno made a sound and launched himself forward. "Easy!" He set the spatula down without turning around, gave the dog a brief pat on the flank, and went back to the pan. Stephanie unclipped the leash. She crossed the kitchen and pressed her mouth to the side of his shoulder. He turned his head and she moved to his jaw, and when he turned fully, she kissed him properly, her palm flat against his chest, his arm coming around her back and pulling her in for a moment before the omelette reminded him it existed. "What a welcome!" She pulled back an inch. "I do my best." He turned back to the stove. "Sit down." She climbed onto the counter instead, which she knew mildly annoyed him, and watched him work. The apartment caught the morning at a good angle. Light coming in sideways off Central Park, which you could see from the kitchen window if you leaned slightly right. She always did. 2 bedrooms, 8th floor, scuffed molding on one hallway wall. She'd said yes before they'd finished the tour. He hadn't argued. A home was supposed to feel like you fit inside it, not like you were still looking for the edges. Her phone buzzed against the counter. She picked it up, read the message, set it down. Promotion went through. Reuben looked at her over his shoulder. She watched his face, the slight shift in his eyes, the half-second of stillness before it settled back to neutral. Deputy director. She'd been at the company for 8 months. He turned fully around, spatula in hand. "Then tonight we go somewhere that matches the occasion. That's not negotiable." "Okay, but Barcelona," she leaned forward. "Maria's wedding is next month. Did you sort the flights?" "Done." He turned back to the stove. But we can only fly in the day before. I have the hearing. Rossi's sentencing. They need me to testify." Bruno settled at her feet with a groan. Stephanie looked out at the strip of bare trees along the park's edge, the branches catching the light at sharp angles. Her father had gotten 5 years. She was still deciding how she felt about that. "What do you think Rossi gets?" Reuben slid the omelette onto a plate and set it on the counter in front of her. Then he stepped between her knees, his hands closing around her hips, and pressed his mouth to the side of her neck. Life. His lips stayed warm against her skin. "I'm holding out for life." His phone rang on the counter beside her. He picked it up without pulling away, one arm still around her, mouth still at her neck, and Stephanie pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. "You're aware we stepped away from port operations?" His voice shifted, clean and flat, the one that wasn't for her. "Castiello Group isn't taking on that work. Carolina Castiello runs export-import now. She's the right person for this conversation. I head the tech division. She'll be able to help you." He ended the call and set the phone back down. He looked at Stephanie. The corner of his mouth moved. "We reorganized." She tilted her head toward the phone he'd just set down. "I noticed. About 8 months ago." He hadn't made a production of it. That wasn't how he did anything. He'd just quietly moved the weight of what he was on to different ground, and she'd watched it happen. And neither of them had said much about it out loud. Some things you just live with, until they become true. He reached down and pulled her sweatshirt over her head in one easy motion. "Reuben, we're going to be late. I've come to believe," his hands found the waistband of her sweatpants and pulled them down, "that there are things worth being late for." He held her eyes, his voice dropping lower. "For instance, becoming a father." Stephanie stared at him. "Reuben?" He was already pulling her in, one hand at the small of her back, the winter light off the park catching his eyes and turning them dark green, his mouth curved. Admit it, practicing is the best part. And there it was, the thing she hadn't been able to name for a long time. 9 years in a country that wasn't hers, building a version of herself that didn't need anyone. She'd been very good at it. But Bruno was asleep at her feet, his hands were warm at her waist, and the eggs were going cold on the plate, and she realized she'd stopped bracing for what came next. She didn't know exactly when that had happened. She was glad. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Outside, the park trees stood bare against the January sky, stripped of everything, going nowhere. She used to think that was a kind of weakness. She was starting to think she'd been wrong, because maybe standing still wasn't always surrender. Maybe sometimes it was what happened when something had finally found where it belonged. The January trees outside the avenue stood bare in the winter wind.
Once, I would have called them, those bare trees, empty, like me, still standing but stripped down by life to something quieter, sadder. Now I know they're not empty at all. They're just waiting for the season that will ask them to bloom again, waiting with roots that never stopped holding on beneath the cold. My name is Stephanie Gambetta, and maybe this time I'm done waiting for my life to begin. Maybe this time I'm ready to stay. Because this time it feels like love has reached deep enough to take root in me.
Thank you for watching Stephanie and Reuben's story. If it moved you, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and come back for more. The deepest loneliness is not being alone. It is not feeling that you belong. Stephanie spent years running. From her father, from his world, from anyone who got too close. She built walls and called them independence. She mistook distance for safety. And then she met someone who didn't ask her to be less afraid, just less alone. So, here's my question for you. Stephanie finally found the place she belonged, and her first instinct was still to run. Would you have gone back, or would the fear have been too much? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. See you in the next story.